I was running late for work and had a very important presentation to get to. I was an accountant, and I had expecting a client to come in for the Lebowski file, a contract that would mean millions of dollars in revenue for my company. My boss had been breathing down my neck for weeks, preparing me for this critical moment in my career. My alarm clock ran out of battery, and I overslept, putting me in a frantic rush through the parking lot. As I turned a corner, I collided with a woman. She was shopping at a nearby store. She fell to the ground with a thud, knocking her out for a moment. The parking garage was dim and chaotic, with concrete walls and floors, metal columns, and the sounds of car engines and honking horns all around me. When the woman woke up, she looked disoriented. She asked, "Where am I?" I recognized her immediately. She was the client who was supposed to meet me. I saw an opportunity in her memory loss and took advantage of it. "You're my client," trying to sound calm and in control. "We have a meeting scheduled for the Lebowski file." I took her arm. I led her to my office, fabricating a story about a thief trying to steal her purse and how I had just saved her life. Inside my office, I sat her down at the conference table and handed her the contract. "Just sign here," I told her, pointing to the dotted line. She signed the agreement without hesitation, still confused about what was happening. As I walked her out of my office, a feeling of unease washed over me. I had taken advantage of her vulnerable state and made a calculated decision to deceive her. The weight of my actions hit me like a ton of bricks. What had I done? Was the potential financial gain worth the guilt and remorse that now plagued me? The thought lingered as I sat in my office staring out the window. At the bustling city below, I had made a grave mistake, one that could have far-reaching consequences. The only question was, what was I going to do about it? I could feel my heart race as I led her back to the parking garage, trying to calm my nerves and come up with a plan. As we walked, the dim light of the garage seemed to be closing in on me, heightening my sense of unease. "Are you sure everything's okay?" she asked, looking up at me with suspicion in her eyes. "Of course," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know," she replied, furrowing her brow. "It just feels like there's something you're not telling me." I knew I had to keep up the act, but I was running out of ideas. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to keep her from remembering the truth. "Look," I said, trying to sound convincing, "I understand that this must be confusing for you, but you have to trust me. The agreement you signed was for your own benefit, and I can promise you that." She seemed to hesitate for a moment. I held my breath, waiting for her response. "Okay," she finally said, still looking uncertain. "I trust you." But as she turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The weight of my guilt was heavy on my shoulders, and I knew I had to come clean before it was too late. "Well," I said, grabbing her arm, "there is something I need to tell you." She turned to face me. Her eyes widened with fear. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The truth is," I said, my voice shaking, "you are my client, and you are here for the Lebowski file. But I took advantage of your memory loss to get you to sign an agreement that was going to benefit me. You see, you and your company didn't exactly agree to sign yet." Her eyes went wide and with shock and anger. "Why would you do something like that?" she asked, her voice rising. "I was desperate," I replied, feeling the weight of my actions crashing down on me. "I was running late for an important meeting, and I saw an opportunity to close the deal." The silence between us was heavy with tension as she processed what I had just told her. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the dim light of the parking garage, surrounded by the echoes of my own guilt and shame. I couldn't believe what was happening. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched her walk away from me, her back rigid with anger. But then, she suddenly stopped, as if something had just dawned on her. She slowly turned her head and looked at me. She looked at me over her shoulder, a small chuckle escaping her lips. You know, she said, her voice low and husky, I never did get a proper thank you for saving my life. Her eyes were wide and intense, and her smile was awkward and unnatural, showing all of her teeth. It was as if she was trying to hide something behind her facade. How about we go to dinner tonight? She suggested, still smiling that creepy smile. You can tell me all about the Lebowski file and how you stopped that thief. I was frozen in place, my mind racing. Was this some kind of trap? Was she going to use the information I gave her against me? I felt like I was in a nightmare, trapped in a situation I couldn't escape from. Why was she mentioning the thief? Why was she saying I saved her life? I couldn't understand it. I came clean. She seemed upset. And now she's telling me about dinner? Sure, I said, trying to sound casual. That sounds great. I didn't want to rock the boat. She turned away. Her chuckling echoed through the parking garage. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that something wasn't quite right about the situation. But I had to play along, to find out what she was really after. I was in too deep, and there was no turning back now. Oh, and one more thing, she said with a chuckle. Meet me at Charlie's Diner off North Boulevard at 8. I want to go dancing afterwards at Ches, that vibrant club downtown. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind was racing with the events of the day. I couldn't believe that I had taken advantage of a woman's memory loss to get her to sign an agreement that was going to benefit me. The guilt was gnawing at me, and I felt a creeping sense of unease that I couldn't shake. When I finally made it way to my apartment, I was hit with a wave of deja vu. The walls were adorned with monochromatic paintings, giving me the space of a sterile feel. The furniture was minimalistic, all in shades of gray, and the hardwood floors gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead lights. The TV was on in the background, playing a news report on the latest stock market trends. I headed straight for my closet, wanting to get dressed for dinner with the woman from the earlier. I had to be careful about what I wore. I didn't want to give her any reason to suspect that anything was wrong. I flipped through my clothes, trying to find something that would make me look professional, but also make me feel comfortable. I finally settled back on a button-up shirt and a pair of dress pants. I took my time getting ready, thinking about what had happened earlier and trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. As I made my way to Charlie's Diner off of North Boulevard, I was filled with a sense of dread. I didn't know what was going to happen or what this woman was going to do, but I had a feeling that tonight was going to be the start of something very dangerous. I felt trapped, as if I had no choice but to go along with whatever she had planned. I looked down at the table, noticing for the first time just how dirty it was. Stains dotted on the surface and a sticky residue was accumulated around the edges. Why are you doing this? I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a slow sip of her whiskey, never taking her eyes off of me. I like to play games, she said, her voice dripping with amusement. And you, my friend, are just another pawn in my board. I couldn't help but feel like I was over in my head. This woman was dangerous, and I had a feeling that I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go to win her game. As I sat across from her, I could feel a tension slowly dissipating. She was joking, and her playful demeanor was putting me at ease. I'm just messing with you, she said with a grin. I'm actually really interested in getting to know you better. I found myself relaxing, and the dirty table and the dim lighting didn't seem so oppressive anymore. We talked and laughed, and I soon forgot my initial feeling of unease. We discussed our favorite music, movies, and I learned that she was a huge fan of jazz. After finishing our drinks, she suggested that we go dancing. I hesitated for a moment, still feeling unsure about this mysterious woman. But then, I decided to take a chance. I had agreed to go dancing with her, so we left Charlie's ready for a new adventure together. After finishing our drinks, the woman suggested that we walk to the club instead of taking a taxi. I agreed, but my unease returned as we stepped out into the dark street. The alleyways were narrow and poorly lit, and the sound of our footsteps echoed off the brick buildings. "You seem nervous," she noted, with a hint of amusement in her voice. "I just don't know why we had to walk," I replied. "It doesn't feel safe." "Oh, don't be such a baby," she teased, looping her arm through mine. "I just wanted to enjoy the night air. Besides, I won't let anything happen to you." As we continued to walk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. I glanced around at the empty walls, the empty streets, feeling like there was someone watching us. The woman seemed oblivious to my concerns, chatting away about her life and her interests, but I couldn't focus on her words as my mind was consumed with fear. As we walked towards Ches, a vibrant club, I started to feel unease once again. The sounds of bass and laughter could be heard from blocks away, and the flashing lights illuminated the dark street. Just as we were about to enter the club, a bouncer called out, "Hey, Jackie," he said, a big smile spreading across his face. She turned to the bouncer with a warm smile. "Hey, Max, how are you doing tonight?" I looked between the two of them, confused. I didn't know her name was Jackie. "So, what's your name?" I asked her. "I thought you knew," she replied with a hint of amusement in her voice. "My name is, Tina Ferguson." I furrowed my brow in confusion. She chuckled. "Jackie is my middle name. I thought that might have confused you when Max called me Jackie." I laughed nervously. "It just caught me off guard," I said. As we made our way to the bar, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Jackie's gaze never wavered from me, her eyes fixated on mine the entire time. It was as if she was trying to look into my soul. And what was even stranger, she didn't seem to blink at all. "So, what brings you here to this club?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. "Oh, just looking for a good time," she chuckled, still not breaking eye contact. We reached the bar and I ordered us both a drink. The bartender was busy, and it took a while for him to get to us. I took the opportunity to glance around the club. It was a vibrant place, with flashing lights and thumping music. People were dancing, laughing, and having generally a great time. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Jackie leaned in close, her breath hot against my ear. "So, what do you think?" she asked, a sly smile prying on her lips. "I think we should slow down," I replied, trying to back away. "I don't really know you." She chuckled, her hand reaching out to touch mine. "Don't be so shy," she purred. "I'm just trying to get to know you." Her touch sent shivers down my spine, and I quickly pulled my hand away. "I think it's time for me to go," I said, standing up from my stool. But she grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Oh, come on," she pleaded. "The night is still young." I hesitated, torn between my desire to leave and my curiosity about this strange woman. In the end, I decided to stay a little longer. After all, what harm could a few more drinks do? I couldn't help but think about the contract I had lied to her about, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew. I mustered up the courage to bring it up. "Jackie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "is there something you're upset about? I feel like there's something you're not telling me." She raised an eyebrow and took a sip of her drink. "Why would you say that?" she asked, her eyes never leaving mine. "Well, the contract," I stammered. "I know I wasn't entirely truthful with you about it." She chuckled and leaned in closer, her hand resting on mine. "It's all right," she said. "I know what you did, and to be honest, I don't really care." I was taken aback by her response. I expected her to still be angry, but instead she seemed almost amused by the whole thing. "But why? I thought you would be mad," I asked. Confusion etched on my face. She took a sip of her drink, never breaking eye contact. "Mad?" she said with a smirk. "No, I'm not mad. I think I can use your mistake to my advantage." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I realized that her agenda was much more mysterious than I had originally thought. She began toying with me, playing with my mind and making me feel increasingly uncomfortable. The club still bustling with people, bass of the music thumping through the floor. Despite the chaos around us, she never took her gaze off of me. It was as if she was trying to get inside my head to uncover my deepest secrets. "So, what exactly is your agenda?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She leaned in closer, her lips brushing against my ear. "That," she whispered, "is something you have to figure out yourself." As we continued our conversation, she kept insisting on buying me more drinks. She told me to stop talking about the contract, and I would look good in front of my boss. I tried to steer the conversation back to her mysterious agenda, but she just shrugged it off and said it was of no concern to me, as long as I got the win. Just relax and enjoy the night, she said, sipping on her drink and never breaking eye contact. I promise you, everything will work out in your favor. Her words were intoxicating, and I found myself drawn to her. She seemed so confident, so sure, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of trust toward her. All right, I said, taking another sip of my drink, but you have to promise to keep your word. She chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Don't worry, I always keep my promises. The rest of the night passed in a blur of drinks and laughter. We danced, talked, and never stopped playing with me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of drinks and laughter. We danced, talked, and she never stopped playing with me, always keeping me on edge. The bar was filled with the sounds of music, clinking glasses and the chatter of patrons, but all I could focus on was her. As we finally stumbled out of the club and into the night, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I had a feeling that this was just the beginning of a dangerous journey. Let's take your car, she suggested. I don't want to take the risk of walking home while we're both drunk. I was a little surprised by her request, but I quickly agreed, and we walked over to my car, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the quiet streets. As I started the engine, she leaned back into the passenger seat and looked at me with a curious expression. So tell me, she said, what other contracts have you worked on? I hesitated, feeling a twinge of unease, but I didn't know much about her. I wasn't sure if I should be telling her about my work, but her gaze was so intense, so probing, that I found myself answering anyways. Well, I've worked on a few contracts for construction and renovations, some for software development and a few for marketing and advertising, I said. She nodded, a small smile prying on her lips. That's impressive, she said. You must have a lot of experience and knowledge in these fields. I laughed, feeling a sense of pride. I've been doing this for a while, I said. I've learned a lot and I've made some great connections along the way. We continued to chat about my work and experiences as I drove her home. Despite my initial reservation, I found myself enjoying her company and the conversation. As we drove through the quiet streets, she suddenly turned to me with a bright smile, her eyes wide open and sparkling. She gazed at me intently, not even blinking, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I wondered what she was thinking, but I didn't dare ask. The silence between us was heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling of something was not right. By the time we pulled up in front of her apartment building, I was feeling more relaxed and comfortable than I had all night. She continued to stare at me, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was ever going to get out of the car at any moment. But she didn't. She just kept smiling at me. I couldn't help but feel drawn by her mysterious gaze. Jackie suddenly yanked out the door and bolted out of the car, shouting, "Good night!" I watched in confusion as she sprinted up the walkway and into her house. A moment later, her head popped out of the window, and she yelled, "I'll call you tomorrow," before disappearing inside. I sat in my car, still stunned by her sudden outburst, before finally starting the engine and heading home. I woke up in a start to find Jackie in my house, sitting on the edge of my bed and watching me sleep. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess of the previous night, but the sight before me was unsettling. Jackie was holding a piece of raw meat, taking bites out of it as she stared at me, with wide open eyes, never breaking eye contact. I couldn't help but feel uneasy, wondering how she got into my house and why she was watching me sleep. But before I could ask any questions, she stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Good morning, sunshine," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the grogginess of sleep. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. "I figured since you brought me home last night that it was only fair that I return the favor," she said, still munching on raw meat. "Plus, I wanted to make sure you were up in time for our meeting today." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. "Our meeting? What meeting?" "The one you have with your boss, of course," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I know it's important, and I don't want you to miss it." I rubbed my temples, trying to remember the details of the meeting. "Right, the meeting," But how did you know about it? She shrugged, still chewing on the meat. I have my ways, but let's not focus on that. We have to get you dressed and ready to impress. As she continued talking, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The way she was acting was far from normal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But before I could say anything, she jumped off the bed and started rummaging through my closet, pulling out clothes and throwing them at me. "Get dressed, we don't have all day," she called over her shoulder. I sighed, feeling completely overwhelmed by the situation, but as I got dressed and followed her out the door, I couldn't help but wonder what the day would bring. As I walked into my living room, I was shocked to see my boss and several other co-workers on my couch and on the floor. And in the midst of them was Jackie, who was grinning from ear to ear. "I just wanted to surprise you," she said, taking another bite of meat. "I hope you don't mind." I was still trying to wrap my head around the situation, but I couldn't help feeling a little uneasy about the sight of her eating raw meat. But before I could say anything, she jumped up and headed towards me. To my surprise, my boss and co-workers had no movement, no sound coming from them. The room was eerily quiet, and Jackie's smile seemed to only grow wider as she continued to stare, taking another bite of raw meat. Then I suddenly realized something horrifying, and just before I scream, I feel a sharp pain and my vision goes black. Philip Henderson, a 31-year-old man who is physically imposing due to his short, brawny build. He is a lawyer, practicing in the streets of New York City during the 1980s. Philip lives in Manhattan and currently resides in his private office located on the 83rd floor of a towering skyscraper. The building he works in is a symbol of the city's ambition and prosperity, towering over the bustling streets below. From his perch high above the city, Philip can see for miles in every direction with the breaking view of skyscrapers and bustling streets of New York. His office reflects his success and the high standards he holds for himself. The furnishings are elegant and tasteful. Rich leather chairs and mahogany desk and shelves lined with leather-bound law books. Large windows let an abundance of natural light illuminating the room and providing a beautiful view of the city. Philip is highly respected in his field and is known for his sharp mind and unwavering determination. He is often sought after by clients who require his expertise, and his reputation precedes him. Despite his success, he remains humble and dedicated to his clients, always striving to provide the best possible outcome for them. The city in which he lives and works is always alive in energy and excitement. The 1980s was a time of great change in New York, and the city was undergoing transformation from a rough and gritty metropolis to a glittering hub of commerce and culture. Despite the challenges and hardships that come with living when working in such a fast-paced environment, Philip embraces the energy of the city and uses it to drive himself forward. In conclusion, Philip is a man of great strength, both physically and mentally. He is driven by a passion for his work and a deep commitment to his clients, always striving to provide the best possible outcome for them. Despite the challenges of life in New York City, he remains optimistic and determined, thriving in the vibrant environment that surrounds him. Philip Henderson is having a particularly stressful day at the office today. As he sat in his mahogany desk, he could feel the sweat running down his face. Despite the chill of the air-conditioned room, the persistent interruptions from his boss who kept storming into his office, to berate him for one thing or another were taking a toll on his nerves. To make matters worse, his coworker John wouldn't stop asking him inane questions about a file. Philip tried to remain calm, but the sound of John's voice grated him like fingernails on a chalkboard. The constant chatter and commotion in the office made it difficult for him to concentrate, and he could feel his frustration building within each passing minute. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind was preoccupied with the thought of his boss's next visit and John's next interruption. The noises in the office were almost overwhelming. The sound of phones ringing, typewriters clacking, and the shuffling of papers filled the air, making it impossible for Philip to think. He looked up from his desk and caught a glimpse of John, who was leaning against the doorframe, tapping his foot impatiently. The look on John's face was one of annoyance and impatience, as if he couldn't understand why Philip wasn't jumping at his every request. Philip could feel his emotions starting to boil over. He was tired of being bothered, tired of being yelled at, and tired of the constant distractions. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. When he opened his eyes again, John was still there, looking at him expectantly. Philip could feel his patience wearing thin and a knot in his stomach tightening. He knew it was only a matter of time before he snapped. As Philip sat at his desk, surrounded by chaos of the office, he couldn't help but feel like he was caught in a never-ending nightmare. The sound of John's voice and the thought of his boss's next visit were enough to make him scream. He took another deep breath and tried to steady himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to give, and as the tension in the room continued to mount, Philip couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The stress of the day was becoming too much for Philip to bear. He started grinding his teeth, producing a harsh and persistent grinding noise that echoed throughout the office. The pressure was so intense that it caused him to chip a tooth, a sharp, painful sensation that sent a jolt of fear through his body. He looked down at the broken tooth, stunned by the sight of the jagged edge and the realization of what had just happened. Philip felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had always prided himself on his appearance and his attention to detail, and the thought of walking around with a broken tooth was more than he could bear. He was about to reach for his tooth when John walked into the office, a look of amusement on his face. "Hey, Phil, what happened to your tooth?" John asked with a smirk. Philip didn't respond. He was too focused on the pain in his mouth to pay attention to John's jibe. He was about to reach for the phone to call his dentist when his cell phone rang. It was his wife, and she was livid.
"Philip, I can't believe you. You left your underwear on the floor again,"
she yelled into the phone, her voice rising in frustration.
"I've told you 100 times to put them in the hamper, but you never listen."
Philip could feel his anger rising, but he still managed to keep his cool. "I'm sorry, honey. I've had a really rough day at the office. Can we talk about this when I get home?"
"No, we can't. I'm tired of your excuses, Philip. You need to start taking some responsibility for your actions."
Philip could feel his anger starting to boil over. He was tired of the constant criticism from his boss, from John, and now his wife. He took a deep breath and tried to remain calm, but the strain was starting to show. "Look, I'm sorry. I'll do better. I promise," he said, his voice trembling with frustration.
"It's always the same with you, Philip. You make promises, you never follow through. I'm just done with this,"
she said, and hung up the phone. Philip sat there, staring at his phone in disbelief. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The stress of the day was starting to get the best of him, and he could feel his control slipping away. He took a deep breath, tried to steady himself, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to give, and the tension in the room continued to mount. Philip was doing his best to hold it together, but the stress of the day was starting to get to him. Just as Philip was getting up for a restroom break, his boss stormed the room, screaming and using vulgar language. Philip felt like crying, the weight of the day pressing down on him. But his boss noticed, and instead of offering help, he began to mock Philip, jeering and taunting him. Brian, another employee of the office, joins in and laughs and claps. adding to the cacophony of insults. John felt bad for Philip and tried to comfort him, but it was no use. The damage was done. Philip's wife calls just then, adding to the stress of the day, by yelling at him yet again for not washing her car the night before. Philip listens, rolling his eyes and feeling like he was at the end of his rope. He raises his voice, but he's still respectful to his wife. As he spoke, Philip's appearance was a testament to the stress he was under. His eyes were bloodshot, the sweat on his forehead beading and running down his face. His clothes were disheveled, his tie loosened and his shirt unbuttoned. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he tried to keep his emotions in check. His boss, on the other hand, was a picture of aggression and anger. He was red-faced, sweating, his eyes blazing with fury. He was shouting and gesticulating his arms, flailing as if he berated Philip. "You're lucky to have this job, you know that?" His boss spat, his face inches from Philip's. "You're nothing without this company, you hear me?" Philip took a step back, trying to put some distance between himself and his boss. He was at a loss for words, the anger and frustration boiling over inside him. I've had enough of this," he said, his voice shaking. I quit! I can't take it anymore! And with that, Philip gathered his things and walked out of the office, leaving behind the shouting and the insults, the laughter and the jeers. He was done with it all, ready to start fresh and leave this chapter of his life behind. The 31-year-old steps onto the elevator. His boss stops the doors from closing, looming over Philip as he begins to hurl insults. The air in the elevator grows thick with tension as Philip stands there trying to keep his composure. The boss's voice is harsh, cutting through the silence like a knife. He spews vulgarities and insults, and Philip can feel his face turned red with anger and embarrassment. The sound of the boss's laughter echoes in the small space, each crackle like a punch in the gut. Philip stands there feeling small and helpless, his hands clenched into fists at his side. The air in the elevator is stale in a combustion of cologne and sweat, and the unmistakable odor of his boss's breath. The only noises are the muffled sounds of the boss's insults and the mechanical whirring of the elevator as it makes its descent. Philip's vision blurs and his chest tightens, but as he refuses to show any weakness in front of his tormentor, he keeps his eyes fixated on the ground, not daring to look up at his boss as he continues his tirade. The boss eventually finishes and steps off the elevator, leaving Philip alone with his thoughts. He takes a deep breath and leans against the wall, feeling as if he just survived the storm. He closes his eyes and lets out a deep sigh as the elevator continues its descent, his heart pounding in his chest. Philip slumps into the driver's seat of his car, feeling exhausted from the events of the day. He rests his head on the steering wheel, trying to gather his thoughts. He's not sure how he's going to break the news to his wife about losing his job, but he knows it won't be easy. He thinks about all the arguments they've had about money and how she's always nagging him to do better. He imagines the look on her face when he tells her he's out of a job, and he feels his stomach twist into knots. How am I going to tell her? He thinks to himself. She's going to be so angry. He runs a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of the stubble against his palm. He takes a deep breath and blows it out slowly, trying to calm his racing thoughts. I'll just be honest, he decides. I'll tell her the truth, and we'll figure it out together. He starts the car and pulls out of the parking lot, still feeling uncertain, but also a little relieved that he's made a decision. He knows the conversation with his wife won't be easy, but he's ready to face it head on. Just then, as he's pulling out, he sees a box fly out of what could be his old office window. The object crashes onto the busy city sidewalk. Philip's heart drops as he sees the remnants of his beloved model airplane scattered on the ground. He remembers how he would spend hours building it, carefully sanding each piece, meticulously painting it. He was so proud of it, and now it's just another pile of broken plastic. He shuts off the engine and feels a mixture of anger and sadness as he thinks of his boss and Brian's cruelty. He takes a deep breath, trying to calm himself down, but as he watches the scene play out in his mind, he realizes he can't let them get the best of him. He starts the car and drives off, determined to face whatever challenges come his way. He knows it won't be easy, but he's ready to fight for what's right. Philip drives through the bustling city streets, his eyes glued to the scenery outside of his car window. He takes in the tall buildings, the busy crowds, observing the people walking on the sidewalk and peering into other cars. He imagines what their life must be like, what their daily routines must consist of, and how different they are from his own. As he drives, he reflects on the events of the day, and how his life has changed so drastically in just a matter of hours. The stress of losing his job and constant harassment from his boss and coworkers weigh heavily on him, causing a knot to form in his stomach. The sounds of the busy city all around him only to add to his anxiety as honking cars and blaring sirens fill the air. Philip's thoughts are consumed with worry and uncertainty, imagining how he will break the news to his wife and how she will react. He imagines the endless cycle of job interviews and trying to make ends meet, the fear of not being able to provide for his family despite all of this. Philip tries to remain positive, taking in the beauty of the city and finding comfort in the fact that there is so much to life to be experienced. As he continues to drive, Philip realizes that life is unpredictable, and that the only thing he can control is how he reacts to the challenges thrown his way. He takes a deep breath and steels himself for the task ahead, determined to face whatever comes his way with courage and grace. Philip sighs as he pulled into the driveway, his mind still reeling from the events of the day. He knew he was in for it as soon as he saw his wife marching outside, her arms crossed and a look of annoyance on her face. Just as he was about to shut off the car, she threw one of her shoes at his windshield, causing a loud crack to fill the air.
"You're so lazy and useless!"
she yelled, her voice carrying through the quiet neighborhood.
"I should have married someone like your boss, someone who knows how to provide for their family."
Philip tried to remain calm as his wife's words hit him like daggers. He had already had a terrible day, and the last thing he needed was to come home to this. He took a deep breath and tried to speak in a controlled voice. "I'm doing the best I can," he replied, his voice crackling under the pressure. I lost my job today." His wife's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment.
"That's no excuse for being lazy, not washing my car."
She shot back.
"I don't want to hear any excuses from you. Just go inside and start looking for a job. We need the money."
Philip got out of the car and walked inside, his head down and his heart heavy. He had a lot of thinking to do and a lot of decisions to make. He just hoped he could make the right ones for himself. Philip tries to reason with his wife, but she is too angry.
"How could you fucking lose your job?"
she screeches.
"You were supposed to be the breadwinner. What are we gonna do now?"
Philip remains calm, but his wife's words sting. He knows that he has let her down, and he feels helpless. I'm sorry, he says quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." But his wife isn't listening. She continues to shout, her voice growing more and more intense. The neighbors are now gathered outside, looking on in alarm. Philip can hear their whispers and feel their judgment. He wants to disappear, but he knows he has to stand his ground. "I'll find another job," he says firmly. "We'll make it work." His wife doesn't seem to hear him. She's too busy ranting and raving, her arms flailing in the air. Philip feels like he's trapped in a nightmare, and he wonders if things will ever be okay again. He closes his eyes and takes a deep breath, trying to steady himself. When he opens his eyes again, his wife is still shouting, but her voice has become a distant murmur. He feels detached,
like he's watching the scene from above. He wonders if this is what it feels like to lose your mind. He wonders if things will ever be okay again. He realizes that all his belongings have been scattered all over the front yard. His wife continued to scream at him, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. He had enough and decided to leave. He needed to leave for a while, and he needed a break from all the chaos. He gets into his car and drives to a local bar called the Red Baron. It was a small, dimly lit dive bar that was known for its cheap drinks and rough crowd. As he entered, he was greeted by the smell of cigarette smoke and the sound of clinking glasses and muffled conversation. Philip found a stool at the bar and sat down, feeling overwhelmed by the chaos of the day. He ordered a whiskey, neat, and took a large gulp, relishing in the burn as it traveled down his throat. He glanced around the bar, observing the diverse group of patrons. Some were laughing loudly, others were deep in conversation, and some were lost in thought, nursing their drinks. Philip felt a sense of comfort in the bar, surrounded by strangers. He ordered another drink and allowed himself to relax, letting his mind wander for a moment. He felt like he was in a different world, a world where he wasn't constantly judged or belittled. He savored the peace and solitude, grateful for the temporary escape from reality. Philip looked up from his drink at the bar and saw a strange man approaching him. The man had a dark demeanor, with a hooded sweatshirt pulled over his face, making it difficult to see his features. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular build. Philip felt a sense of unease as the stranger approached him and took the seat next to him. Philip watched as the stranger took a deep breath before speaking. His voice was low, and his words were slow and deliberate. "I've been watching you," the stranger said. "I know what you are going through." Philip's heart began to race as he tried to gauge the stranger's intentions. He could hear the sounds of glasses clinking and conversations being held at the other tables, but all he could focus on was the man next to him. What are you talking about?" Philip asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're going through a tough time," the stranger continued, "but I can help you. I know what you need." Philip couldn't help but feel suspicious of a man's motives. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He took a sip of his drink and tried to gather his thoughts. "I don't know what you're talking about," Philip replied. "I don't need your help." The stranger let out a deep, sinister laugh that echoed through the bar. "Oh, I think you do," he said. "You just don't know it yet." Philip could feel his pulse pounding in his temples as he tried to figure out what to do. He didn't want to stay and hear what the stranger had to say, but he also didn't want to leave and potentially leave himself vulnerable to whatever the man had in store for him. As the stranger leaned in closer, Philip could smell the faint scent of tobacco on his clothing. He didn't know what the man wanted from him, but he was certain he'd want to find out. Philip turned to the stranger and asked, with a hint of suspicion in his voice, "Excuse me, but how do you know so much about me, and how do you think you can help me?" The stranger's expression remained calm and collected as he leaned back into the seat and replied, "I've been watching you, Philip. I've seen the way your boss and co-workers treat you, and I know how much your wife has been putting you through lately. I understand that you're going through a difficult time. I just want to help." The stranger's words were spoken with sincere tone, making Philip feel a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long time. Philip leaned in closer to the stranger, confusion and curiosity written all over his face. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The stranger simply replied, "I have a proposal for you, my friend. Something that could change your life forever. But first, I need to know if you're ready to listen." Philip furrowed his brows, not entirely sure what the stranger was trying to tell him. I'm listening," he said, hesitantly. "Good." The stranger nodded, his eyes gleaming with an almost unnatural light. "I can offer you the chance to start over, to leave your past behind and forge a new path. But it won't be easy, and there will be risks involved. Are you prepared for that?" Philip's heart was pounding in his chest, the stranger's words igniting a spark of hope within him. He didn't know exactly what he was being offered, but he felt drawn to it all. Yeah, he replied without hesitation. I'm ready to take the chance. Philip returns home feeling a mix of confusion and frustration. He had never seen the stranger before and didn't understand what he wanted. The stranger left him a note with a number and a message to call at 3:14 a.m. The thought of calling the number left on the paper at 3:14 a.m. was a daunting one. He didn't even know what he was going to say, but as he entered his home, he saw that his wife was gone, and he felt a sense of relief. He didn't have to face her anger tonight. Philip made his way to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. He couldn't help but think about the stranger. He took out the paper and looked at the number again. He wondered if he should call, but he was scared of what might happen. He put the paper back down and took a sip of his water. He needed time to think. He remembered the environment of the Red Baron and how noisy it was, with the sound of glasses clinking and laughter filling the air. He contrasted it to the silence of his own home, which was only broken by the sound of his own breathing. He closed his eyes and tried to clear his mind, and the thoughts kept coming. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Philip hears a noise outside and sees his boss and his wife laughing and hugging each other. They are sharing a bottle of wine. Philip's heart sank as he watched his boss and his wife embrace and laugh together. Holding a bottle of wine, he felt a mix of emotions and anger, betrayal and sadness all at once. He couldn't believe the one person he trusted the most in his life was conspiring against him. He felt a lump form in his throat, and his eyes welled up with tears. He was about to confront them, but he paused for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. He wondered what could have driven his wife to cheat on him with his boss. He tried to think back to their relationship, searching for any signs of indicators, but he couldn't find anything. The sound of their laughter and the clinking of the glasses echoed through the street, reminding Philip of how alone he truly was. He slowly made his way back inside, feeling defeated and heartbroken. He couldn't help but think about the man at the bar and the mysterious phone number he had left him. He wasn't sure what the future held for him, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to make a drastic turn as Philip runs out of his back door in a hurry, feeling overwhelmed and lost. He can't believe what he just saw, and he wants to get as far away from it all as possible. He stumbles in the dark, trying to find his way through the unfamiliar back streets of his neighborhood. His thoughts are racing, his heart pounding, and he just wants to find a place to escape, to somewhere where he can be alone with his thoughts. Finally, Philip sees a park in the distance, and he makes his way there, feeling a sense of relief as he approaches the open space. He finds a quiet corner hidden by a large tree and sits down on the grass. Trying to calm his breathing and think as he sits there, he realizes that it's almost 3:14 a.m., and he remembers the mysterious man's words and the piece of paper with the phone number. Philip takes out the piece of paper out of his pocket, looks at it, and hesitates for a moment before dialing the number. The phone rings a few times, and then he hears a voice on the other end. The voice is deep and mysterious, and it says, "Philip, I've been waiting for your call. Are you ready to learn the truth?" Philip is shocked and doesn't know what to say, but he feels like he has to know what this is all about. "Yes," he says. Yes, I'm ready."
"Philip," the man says, "you have reached the brink of change, a place where the choices you make will determine your destiny."
Philip was taken back by the man's words. "What do you mean? Who are you?"
"I am a guide," the man replies. "A guide to help you find your true path, to see beyond the veil of the world you know, and discover the hidden truths that lie within you."
Philip's mind was racing. "I don't understand. What truths? What path?" The man's voice was calm and steady.
"The path to your greatest potential, to the realization your dreams and desires. But be warned, this path will not be easy. You will face challenges and obstacles, but if you stay true to yourself and believe in your own power,
You will find the answers you seek.
Philip was in disbelief. How do I even start my journey?
You have already taken the first step, Philip, the man says. By calling this number, you have shown that you are ready for change. The journey will reveal itself to you, one step at a time. Trust in yourself, and the answers will come.
With that, the line went dead. Philip sat there, stunned in silence, trying to process what had just happened. He felt a glimmer of hope, a flicker of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way for him to turn his life around. Philip retired to the quiet corner of the park and leaned against a large oak tree. He closed his eyes, trying to forget the day's events and relax himself. The sound of distant cars, people talking, faded away as Philip's breathing became more shallow and slow. Despite being on a park bench in the open, he felt safe and secure. Surrounded by nature, he pulled his jacket tighter around him and let his mind wander. Eventually drifting off into a peaceful sleep, Philip rubbed his eyes, trying to make sense of the change in surroundings. He was no longer in the park, but in a luxurious hotel room. The room was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive cologne. Philip sat up in a plush king-size bed and gazed around in awe. The walls were adorned with gold-trimmed wallpaper, and crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling. The furniture was made of polished mahogany, and the plush rug underfoot was a deep burgundy in color. Philip was shocked by his sudden change in surrounding. He couldn't believe that he was in such a fancy hotel room. He walked over to the window and looked out the cityscape. The view was breathtaking, with towering skyscrapers and bustling streets below. Philip sat back down in his bed, feeling overwhelmed. He couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was about to happen to him. He couldn't remember how he ended up in the hotel room, but he was grateful for the respite from his problems. He lay back down, feeling relaxed for the first time in a long time, and he let himself sink into the soft mattress. The king-size bed was dressed with a crisp white linens and fluffy pillows. A large TV rested on the wall, and a small seating area was arranged near the windows. Philip was shocked by his sudden change of surrounding, and he wondered how he got there. He noticed a note on the nightstand and picked it up. The note read, "You're welcome," in bold letters. He was confused by the message and couldn't figure out what it meant. He wondered who had brought him here and why. Philip walked around the room, taking in the luxurious details. The walls were adorned with expensive paintings, and the furniture was all made of high-quality materials. A large vase of fresh flowers sat on a nearby table, filling the room with a sweet fragrance. Philip couldn't believe his luck. He was still in a state of shock as he wondered what was happening to him. He thought about the mysterious man he had met in the bar, and the phone call he had. He wondered if the two were connected to the hotel. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, and sat down on the edge of his bed. As he sat there, he couldn't help but think about the recent events of his life. He was going through a difficult time, and now he was in a fancy room. He was grateful for the change of scenery, but at the same time, he was still filled with the questions of uncertainty about what was happening. Philip hears a loud knock on the door, and an employee shouted,
Room service!
With a sense of confusion, he gets up from the bed and heads towards the door, slowly opening it to see an array of carts filled with an assortment of delicious foods. The sweet aroma of fresh fruits, bacon, pastries, and coffee wafted through the air. Philip was in awe as he looked at the carts, each one filled with a different type of food. There were stacks of pancakes with syrup and melted butter, a variety of eggs with different toppings, and a carving station with juicy ham and succulent roast beef. The employees dressed starched white uniforms with black ties stood at attention as they presented the feast before him. They had a friendly smile on their face, and their eyes remained focused and alert. Philip couldn't help but feel a sense of extravagance and luxury as he had never been treated in such a manner. Philip sat down at the small table in the room and began to serve himself, his mouth already watering at the sight of food. As he ate, he couldn't help but wonder who was behind this generous gesture, why they would go through such lengths to provide him with a lavish meal. The thought left him feeling both grateful and bewildered. Philip eagerly digs into the feast in front of him, savoring each bite. He hasn't eaten anything substantial in days, and he can feel his hunger pangs subsiding in each passing moment. He starts with a tray of freshly baked croissants smothered in butter and jelly. The flaky, buttery texture and the sweet fruit flavor send shivers down his spine. He continues to devour the food in front of him, savoring each bite. He eats a plate of eggs Benedict, savoring the rich, creamy sauce for the perfect poached egg. He finishes it off with a stack of fluffy pancakes drenched in syrup and sprinkled with powdered sugar. He can feel his energy levels rising as he eats and continues to eat until every last bite is gone. By the end of the feast, Philip is completely stuffed, sits back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. Philip opens the wardrobe door with curiosity and is taken aback by what he sees. Rows of luxurious suits in various colors and styles hanging neatly in the spacious wardrobe. He runs his hand over the material of the first suit and is impressed by how soft it feels. The suits are made from the finest fabrics like cashmere, silk, and wool, with intricate details like hand-stitched buttons and pocket squares. The jackets are tailored with perfection, with broad shoulders and a snug fit at the waist. Philip feels overwhelmed by the selection and decides to try a few on. He finds a sleek black suit that fits him perfectly and admires himself in the mirror. He twirls around, admiring the way the suit moves with him, feeling like a new man. He can't help but feel grateful for this experience and wonders who's behind this incredible gesture. Philip looks through the pockets of the suits and the wardrobe and finally finds a sleek black credit card. He inspects the card and is amazed to see that it has no limit. Excited by this newfound wealth, he quickly gets dressed and in one of the expensive suits he finds in the wardrobe and makes his way down to the hotel lobby. As he steps outside, he feels a sense of power and confidence that he has never experienced before. He raises his hand to hail a taxi, and one pulls up in front of him almost instantly. He opens the doors and gets in, giving the driver the address of his old office building. As the taxi makes its way through the busy city street, Philip feels a sense of excitement and anticipation. He wonders what the day will bring and what kind of opportunities will present themselves now that he has this unlimited credit card. He decides to make the most of his unexpected turn of events and enjoys the ride, taking in all the sights and sound of the city as they pass by. Philip immediately freezes in his seat. The driver begins laughing hysterically and slams on the accelerator, speeding through the streets. Suddenly, Philip hears screams pierce through the air. The driver, still laughing and speeding, doesn't seem to have noticed the commotion. Philip starts to feel a sense of dread building inside him. He can hear the fear and panic in the voices of the people who are screaming. He looks out the window and sees that they are getting closer to the source of the screams. He realizes that they must be in trouble and decides to act quickly. Philip pounds on the glass separating him from the driver and yells, "Something's wrong! Stop the car! We need to help them!" The driver doesn't seem to hear him and continues on at the same reckless pace. Philip starts to feel panic settling in. Suddenly, there is a loud crash just up ahead, and the driver slams on the brakes. Philip's heart races as he realizes the woman's scream was from his wife, and the man's scream was from his boss. He remembers the strange man's words about everything being connected, and feels a sense of dread wash over him. The taxi driver, who has been laughing and speeding, drives the car up closer to the crash site, and then suddenly slams on the brakes, causing Philip to lurch forward. He looks outside and sees his wife and boss lying on the ground. Philip screams and jumps out of the taxi, leaving the driver behind, and rushes to their aid. His wife is screaming and holding her leg, while his boss is lying still, not moving. Philip quickly calls for an ambulance and starts performing CPR on his boss, trying to revive him. The ambulance arrives quickly and the paramedics take over. Philip follows them to the hospital, where he stays by his wife's side, holding her hand and waiting for any news about his boss. The next few hours are a blur for Philip. As he waits for any update, he feels like his life has turned upside down, and he can't make sense of it all. The strange man's words kept echoing in his mind, and he starts to wonder if there's some kind of connection between the actions and the events that have transpired. Finally, the doctor emerges from the emergency room, and Philip jumps up and his heart pounds. The doctor tells him that his wife will be okay, but that his boss didn't make it. Philip feels a wave of sadness wash over him, and he can't help but feel like it was all his fault. He's not sure what to do next, but he knows that he needs to start piecing his life back together. This is part 1 of the story. If you want more, stay tuned for part 2. Thank you for watching.
It was early June, and I had set out on a camping trip, eager to explore the forest and see it for myself. The first few hours were uneventful. The forest was as beautiful as I had imagined it. The trees were tall and majestic, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. But as the day turned to evening, the forest began to change. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The birds stopped singing, and the only sound was the crunching of leaves underfoot. The air grew colder, and a thick mist began to roll in. Obscuring my vision, I should have turned back then, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest. The mist grew thicker, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. And then I heard it, the sound of a woman. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as it grew louder, I realized that the sound was of someone in distress. I followed the sound. As I walked deeper into the forest, the mists grew thicker, and the crying grew louder. And then I saw her. She was lying on the ground, in a small clearing, her clothes torn, her face covered in blood. She was holding her side, where a large wound was visible. As I approached her, I could see that she was terrified. Her eyes were wide open, and they were filled with fear. She was crying. I could see deep cuts in her face and arms. It was as if she had been dragged through the forest. I reached out to her, but she flinched, her cries growing louder. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening. I tried to speak to her, to calm her down, but she didn't respond. I could see that she was in shock. I knew I had to get her out of the forest. I had to get her help. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around her. As I turned to leave the clearing and get help, I saw something lurked in the forest. It was dressed in strange clothing, and its face was covered. It moved rather quickly, its long fingers reaching out towards us. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear. It was getting closer. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But the end never came. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. I turned back to look at the woman, but to my surprise, she was gone. I searched for her, calling out her name, but there was no answer. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I eventually found my way back to my tent, but it was all too strange and bizarre that I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. As I lay in my tent, trying to make sense of what just happened, I suddenly wake up, my heart racing, my clothes drenched in a sweat. I suddenly realized that it was all just a dream. I looked around my tent. Everything was as it should be. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. But the memory of the dream stayed with me, fresh in my mind. I decided my fun was now ruined, so I packed my things and left the forest as fast as I could. The experience had left me questioning my own sanity, but I knew deep down that it was just a dream, yet it felt so real. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. And in my dream, they were so vivid, so real. I couldn't help but wonder if they were trying to tell me something. But what could it be? I still don't know. There had to be a deeper meaning to the dream, a message that I was supposed to understand. The next morning, I couldn't let it go. I began researching anything, everything about the forest. I looked into local news articles and legends, but nothing seemed to connect me to my dream. Then I stumbled upon an article from 2 years ago about a tragic incident that had occurred in the forest. It was about a young woman who had gone missing while camping in the same area I had been. Her body was never found, the case never been solved. As I read more about the incident, I realized the details of the article matched my dream almost exactly. The description of the woman, her clothing, the location where she was last seen was all the same. I couldn't believe it. It was as if the dream had been a memory of a past event. I felt a chill run down my spine. I realized the implications of this discovery. Could it be that my dream was not just a dream, but a manifestation of the past event? I couldn't shake off the feeling I was meant to find this article. The dream was communicating. It was trying to tell me something. But what? I still didn't understand. I felt deep sadness for the woman, for the tragedy that had occurred so recently and had never been solved. The discovery only added more questions and more layers to the mystery of the dream. I felt a sense of responsibility to uncover the truth, to find out what really happened to the woman. But I knew it would be a difficult task. The case had been cold for 2 years, and few leads to follow. Determined to find the missing woman and the dream that had haunted me, I found out where the woman lived and decided to pay a visit to the neighborhood. I knocked on doors asking the neighbors about her, hoping to gain insight into her life and those who were close to her. The first person I talked to was an elderly woman. She lived next door, and she was hesitant to talk to me at first. Eventually, she opened up.
"She was such a sweet girl,"
the lady said, her voice filled with sadness.
"Always had a smile on her face, always willing to help out. I can't believe something like this could happen to her."
I asked her if she knew of anyone who would want to harm the woman, but she shook her head.
She didn't have any enemies that I know of. She was well liked by everyone in the neighborhood.
I thanked her for her time and moved to the next house. The next person I talked to was a young man who had lived across the street from the woman. He told me that he had been friends with her for some years, and that she had been like a sister to him. "She always was so full of life," he said. His voice choked with emotion. I can't believe she's gone. I still can't believe it." He told me that the woman had been an avid camper and loved to spend time in the forest. He also mentioned that she had been planning a camping trip with a group of friends just before she went missing. I asked him if he knew who her friends were and if they had any communication or contact information for them. He declined and said he wasn't sure who they were. As I continued to talk to the woman's neighbors, I began to piece together a more complete picture of her life. I discovered she had been a kind and generous person with a passion for the outdoors and love for adventure. But as I delved deeper into her past, I also discovered that she had been struggling with some personal issues and had been seeking help from a therapist. With this new information, I decided to pay a visit to the therapist. I explained my situation and asked if she could provide any insight into the woman's state of mind before her disappearance. The therapist was hesitant to reveal confidential information, but she did tell me that the woman had been dealing with some difficult emotions and had been trying to cope with them through nature and outdoor activities. I left the therapist's office with a sense of both understanding and unease. I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something important that I was missing. The more I dug into the woman's past, the more I felt I was on the brink of discovery. Something significant. I knew that it was only a matter of time before I found the missing piece. As I continued my investigation, I felt as if I was following a trail of clues, each one leading me closer to the truth. But as I neared the end of that trail, I couldn't help but feel the sense of dread. What if the truth was something I wasn't prepared to face? After the long day of research and questioning, I felt I needed a break. I remembered seeing a diner near the woman's neighborhood, and a burger with fries sounded like a damn good thing. I was hungry and needed a small break to reflect on the clues I had discovered so far. As I walked towards the diner, the streets were busier, the air filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and cooking meat. I could see the diner from a distance, the neon lights of the sign flickering in the darkness. As I entered the diner, I was greeted by the sound of sizzling burgers, the chatter of patrons. The diner was small and cozy, red vinyl booths lining the walls, and a long counter running along the back. The floors were made of worn linoleum, and the windows were decorated with neon signs advertising various brands of soda and beer. The patrons of the diner were a diverse group of people, from truckers to college students, all united in their love of good food and conversation. I took a seat at the counter and ordered a burger and fries. As I wanted for my food, I couldn't help but overhear the conversations around me. One man talked about his recent hunting trip, while another was discussing the latest sports game. A group of students were laughing and joking, their faces lit up with excitement of youth. As I sat there, surrounded by warmth of energy of the diner, I felt a sense of peace and normalcy. For a moment, I was able to forget about the missing woman, the unsolved case, and the dream that had consumed me for so long. But as I took a bite of my burger, the memory of the woman came flooding back. I realized my break was over, and it was time to get back to work. I finished my meal, paid my bill, and headed back out into the night. I knew that the answers I was looking for were still out there, somewhere, and I was determined to discover them. As I was leaving the diner, a waitress ran out and grabbed my attention. She had heard that I was investigating the woman's disappearance and asked if I was looking for Lisa. I confirmed that I was, and she seemed hesitant to talk at first.
Can we talk somewhere private?
She asked, looking around nervously, as if she was afraid of someone listening in. I suggested we take a walk, and she agreed. Her face was worried and stressed. She was dressed in a crisp white blouse, black pants, and her hair was tied back in a ponytail. Her face, pale, her hands were shaking as she kept looking around, checking if anyone was listening. As we walked, she told me her name was Sarah, and that she had been friends with Lisa. She told me that Lisa was a kind and caring person, always willing to help others. But as she spoke, I could sense that she was holding something back. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked, trying to keep my tone gentle. Sarah hesitated before finally confessing that Lisa had confided in her about some strange occurrences that she had been experiencing in the forest. Lisa had told her about feelings such as being watched and followed, and about finding strange symbols etched into the trees.
I didn't believe her at first,
Sarah said, her voice shaking with fear.
I thought it was just imagination. Just a wild imagination. But then when she went missing, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to what she had told me. I asked her if she knew where the symbols were located, but she didn't.
Sarah continued to tell me about Lisa's habits and interests. She mentioned that for several months, Lisa had been visiting the forest every day. She had become fascinated with a particular type of bird that would only be out and about during that time of year. Lisa had started a bird journal and was tracking the bird's movements and behavior.
She always was so excited to show me the pictures. She took and told me about the different birds she saw,
Sarah said with a hint of sadness in her voice. But as she spoke, I noticed her demeanor was changing. She seemed more and more paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder, as if she was afraid of someone following us. Sarah hesitated before finally confessing that Lisa had started hanging out with another woman. This woman was very awkward and strange. She had never seen the woman before, and Lisa never mentioned her name. But Lisa had sworn that she was just sharing a hobby with a fellow bird enthusiast.
but now that she's gone, I can't help but wonder if this woman had anything to do with it,
Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. We continued walking. As Sarah spoke, the night air was cool and crisp. The streets grew quiet. The only sounds were our footsteps and the distant hum of traffic. The streetlights casted a yellow glow on the pavement, and the buildings casted long shadows on the ground. Sarah's face was etched with fear, and her eyes were constantly darting around, checking if anyone was following. As we walked, I could see that the more she talked, the more paranoid and scared she became. She kept repeating how she wished she had believed Lisa's stories, how she wished she had done something to help her friend. I could see that she was holding back tears, and her voice was shaking with emotion. I assured her that I would do everything in my power to find out what happened to Lisa, and that any information she had would be helpful. She handed me a note with an address and a time for us to meet the next day. Her face worried and stressed. She gave me a hug, and then she ran back inside the diner. I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the darkness. I knew that I had a lot of work to do, and the answers I was looking for were still out there. As I started back home, I thought I heard a noise nearby. I turned to look, but I couldn't see anyone. I shrugged it off as my imagination and continued on my way. I was feeling a little uneasy, but I told myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I finally made it back to my home, a cozy two-story house in the suburbs. My parents were out of town at a business conference, so I had the house to myself for the summer. Finally, it's time for some much-needed sleep. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It was nice to be back in the comfort of my own home. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, the smell of fries and my bacon burger still lingering in the air, coming from my leftover box that I brought home from last night. Oops, I guess I should have put that in the refrigerator. I made myself a quick breakfast and sat down to watch the morning news on the kitchen TV. "We're expecting clear skies and sunny weather for the rest of the week," the weatherman shouted. I was feeling relaxed and calm, enjoying the peace and quiet. But that peace and quiet was short-lived. As I finished my breakfast, I heard a noise from outside. I froze, my heart racing as I tried to listen for it again. But there was nothing, just silence. I told myself that it was probably just the wind or a stray cat, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I got up from my table and walked to the window, trying to peer through the blinds to see if I could spot anything. But there was nothing. Nothing there, just quiet. Just a quiet street on an empty house. I decided to take a walk, thinking that some exercise might do me some good. I had an hour to burn before I had to meet Sarah. I grabbed my Walkman and put on my headphones, hoping that some music would help clear my head. As I walked, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the neighborhood was. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the trees. I walked down the sidewalk, passing by the rows of houses that all looked the same. The houses were all painted in different colors, but they all had the same generic design. The lawns were neatly trimmed. The flower beds were filled with bright, colorful flowers. I turned a corner and found myself walking down a street lined with tall oak trees. The trees were so tall that they blocked out the sun, casting the street in a cool, dappled shadow. I could hear the sound of birds singing in the trees, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. As I walked, I noticed a small park on the corner of the street. I decided to take a detour and check it out. The park was small, with just a few swings and a slide, but it was surrounded by tall hedges, giving me a sense of privacy. I sat down on a swing and closed my eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over me. As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel that I was being watched. I opened my eyes and looked around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and got up, telling myself that it was just my imagination. I continued my walk, eventually reaching the parking lot. I was about to cross the parking lot when I saw a figure in a hoodie watching me from the corner of my eye. I turned around to get a better look, but the figure quickly turned around and walked away. It looked like a woman, but it was too far for me to tell for sure. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I decided to leave. But as I turned around to leave, the figure was now standing about 30 feet away from me, staring straight at me. This time, the figure was too close to ignore. It was a woman, dressed in a hoodie, her face obscured by the hood. I couldn't see her face, but I felt her eyes staring straight into mine. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me for what felt like an eternity, before turning around and walking away. I was frozen, my heart racing. I couldn't explain what just happened, but I knew that I needed to get out of there. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to call off the figure. "Hey, do you need help?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty parking lot. The figure stopped walking, turned its head, and stared at me. I couldn't see their face, but the way that they were staring at me was creeping me out. I felt a surge of fear wash over me, and I knew that I needed to get out of there. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I was sure that I was at a safe distance. I took a long detour to the library, my mind racing with questions. I was so lost in thought that I didn't even realize how far I had walked until I looked down at my watch and saw that I had just 3 minutes to spare before my meeting with Sarah. I quickened my pace and arrived at the library, my heart pounding in my chest. The library, a grand old building with towering columns and a large clock tower. The front doors were made of heavy wood and were flanked by 2 stone lions. The inside of the library was just as impressive. High ceilings, rows upon rows of books. The walls were lined with paintings and sculptures, and there were several comfortable reading nooks scattered throughout the room. As I walked through the library, I couldn't help but notice the people inside. There were students bent over their textbooks, old men flipping through newspapers, mothers reading to their children. The air was filled with the sound of pages turning and hushed conversations. I made my way to the back of the library. As I walked through the library, I couldn't help but notice the number of students that were present. With summer break in full swing, I found it strange to see so many students in the library. I also noticed that similar thing at the diner earlier, where there were a lot of students hanging out. It was odd, and it made me feel uneasy, as I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not right. It was now 11 minutes after 11, and Sarah should have been here by now. I searched the library for her. I couldn't find her. I was starting to get worried when I finally saw her sitting alone at a table in the back corner of the library. She was acting very weird. Her clothes were dirty. She seemed to be breathing heavily as if she had just been running. She was sweating profusely. Her clothes were disheveled and her hair unkempt. I approached her, trying to hide my suspicion. "Sarah, what's going on? You look terrible," I said, trying to sound concerned.
I'm fine,
She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her breath smelled terrible, and she had leaves in her hair. "Are you sure? You seem really upset," I pressed.
I'm just tired.
She said, avoiding my gaze. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. I didn't want to push her too hard, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I know you said you knew Lisa, but can you please tell me more about her? You seem to know a lot about her," I asked, trying to sound casual.
Why are you so obsessed with Lisa? Why does everyone like her so much? What about me? Doesn't anyone care about me?
She replied, her voice shaking. I was taken aback by her sudden outburst. "I'm not obsessed with Lisa. I just want to know what happened to her, that's all," I said, trying to calm her down. But Sarah wasn't listening. She continued to ask me why I was so interested in Lisa's disappearance, and why everyone seemed to care about her so much. She seemed almost paranoid, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was something she was hiding. "Sarah, what's going on? Why are you acting like this? Do you know something about Lisa's disappearance that you're not telling me?" I asked, trying to get to the bottom of her strange behavior. But Sarah just shook her head and refused to answer any more of my questions. She quickly gathered her things and ran out of the library, leaving me standing there confused and with more questions than answers. As Sarah runs out of the library, she is clearly panicked and disoriented. She doesn't seem to be paying attention to her surroundings and doesn't notice the car speeding towards her. I tried to call out to her, to warn her, but it's too late. The car plows into her at full speed, and she is thrown several feet into the air. I can hear the sound of her body hitting the pavement. It's a loud thud that echoes through my mind. She lands with a sickening crunch, her body rolling several times before coming to a stop. I am frozen in shock, unable to move, unable to speak. The driver of the car is frantically getting out of the car, screaming and crying. People are starting to gather around, some trying to help, others just standing there in shock. I can see the blood pooling around Sarah's body, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles. I can see her chest rising and falling, but I know it's just a matter of time before she dies. I feel a wave of nausea wash over me as I realize what just happened. I feel guilt and responsible. I should have stopped her. I should have done something, but it was too late. I can see the pain and the fear in her eyes as she takes her last breath, and I know that she was hiding something terrible. I try to process what just happened and why, but it's too much to bear. I can't shake the image of her body lying there on the road. Her body, stained with blood, staining the pavement. I don't know what to do or where to go. I just know that I will never forget this moment, and the guilt will haunt me forever. As the woman in the car got out, I was shocked. She was wearing the same strange hooded outfit as the woman I had seen in the park earlier. Her face was obscured by a dark veil, but I could see her eyes shining through the shadows. She was clearly distressed, her hands shaking, as she surveyed the damage of the car. But as our eyes met, I saw a hint of a smile on her lips, and for a brief moment, it felt like she winked at me. I was horrified. Was this some sort of twisted game? Was she somehow connected to the strange occurrences that had been happening? And what about Sarah? Was she just another pawn in this twisted game? My thoughts were racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The driver quickly got back into the car and drove away, leaving me standing there alone and confused. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was following me. I decided to head back home, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I couldn't help but think back to the strange woman in the park, the hooded figure in the diner, and now the mysterious driver of the car. Was there a connection between them? Was it all just a bizarre coincidence? What about Lisa, the woman I had been investigating? Was she really just a bird watcher, or was there something more sinister going on? I had so many questions but no answers. I knew that I had to find the truth, no matter how disturbing it can be. I was determined to uncover the mystery, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me, and I was running out of time. I had to get to the police. As I made my way to the police station, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the hooded figure from earlier watching me. But just as I was about to dismiss it as paranoia, I saw it. The car from the library, the one that had been parked several houses down from mine earlier, was now following me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as it got closer and closer, I could see that it was definitely following me. My heart began to race as I quickened my pace, trying to distance myself from the car, but it seemed to only drive faster, closing the gap between us. I could see the driver now, and it was the same woman who had been driving the car that hit Sarah. And just like before, she had the same eerie smile on her face. Panic set in as I realized that I had to get away from her. I darted down an alleyway, hoping to lose her in the maze of back streets, but no matter how fast I ran, or how many turns I made, the car seemed to always be just behind me. Finally, I found myself at a dead end. With the car closing in on me, I could hear the engine roaring as it got closer and closer. I knew it was about to be the time. I was about to be ran over, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the impact. But the impact never came. I opened my eyes, and the car was gone. I was alone in an empty street. I was left standing there, panting, sweating, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, and that I was in grave danger. I knew I had to get to the police station and tell them everything that had happened, but I couldn't shake this feeling. I was being watched, I was being followed, and I was in grave danger. Suddenly, I noticed I am bleeding, and a piece of sharded glass from a headlight is stuck into my rib. My clothes are wet, and I hadn't noticed it before. I continue, and I feel lightheaded, and seem to come in and out of consciousness. Finally, I wake up in the hospital with doctors and nurses surrounding me. The room is bright and sterile. The sound of machines beeping in the background. I can see the white walls and the hospital beds lined up next to me. The doctors are all dressed in scrubs and are discussing my condition in hushed tones. I notice that my left arm is in a cast, my head is bandaged, and one of the doctors notices that I am awake and comes over to me. She introduces herself as Dr. Smith and tells me that I was involved in a car accident and was brought to the hospital with multiple injuries. She explains that I will need to stay in the hospital for a few days to recover before I am able to go home. I try to tell them about the car chase and the woman in the park, but my voice is weak and the words are jumbled. The doctor assures me that the police are investigating the accident and that I should rest and not worry about anything else for now. Suddenly, I wake up to the sound of screaming and notice a common commotion outside my room. I try to get up, but my body feels weak and heavy. I hear what sounds like nurses fighting off a patient who is shouting, "You ruined it! You ruined it! You ruined it!" I try to make sense of what's happening, but my thoughts are still foggy. Suddenly, a nurse enters my room and tells me that everything that has happened to me was just in my imagination. I'm confused and try to speak, but no words come out. She explains that I am in a mental asylum and that I have been suffering from a severe case of psychosis. The woman I thought was Lisa, the car accident, the woman in the park, and all the other events that I thought had happened up until now were just all figments of my imagination. I am shocked and try to process what I am being told, trying to come to terms with the fact that my reality was not real. As I lay in the hospital bed trying to piece together the events that led me here, I can't help but feel the sense of betrayal and confusion. The nurse tells me that the woman I thought was Lisa, the missing woman I had been trying to find, was actually a figment of my imagination. She explains that I have been in a rehabilitation center. I ask about the commotion in the hallway, and the nurse tells me that it's Lisa, or rather, the woman I thought was Lisa. She explains that this woman who I had been imagining is extremely unstable and dangerous. She had been the one responsible for my recent deterioration, tormenting me and contributing to my downfall. I can't believe that all this time the person who I thought I was trying to help was actually hurting me. As I was trying to process this information, the nurse tells me that the woman had been caught and was taken back to her room, but before she could be properly restrained, she had attacked one of the nurses and escaped. The staff is currently searching for her, and I am told to stay in my room for my safety. I lay in my bed feeling a mix of emotions. I am relieved to know that I am not crazy, and that the woman I thought was Lisa was never real. But at the same time, I am saddened by the fact that I have been living in this delusional world for so long. As I lay there, lost in thought, I hear a commotion outside my door once again. I can hear shouting and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. The door bursts open, and the woman who I thought was Lisa stands there with a wild look in her eyes. She is covered in blood and holding a scalpel. I can see the nurse's uniform she is wearing and realize she must have killed one of the staff. She looks at me with a twisted smirk.
You ruined it!
She says.
You ruined it!
I try to back away, but she lunges at me with a scalpel. I feel a sharp pain in my neck as Lisa continues to deliver strike after strike. I feel my vision fading as I hear the stranger yell, "Stop!" followed by a loud boom. My ears begin ringing. Lisa goes limp. I suddenly feel what seems to be a warm mist spray my face. I try to see, but I can only make out that Lisa's eyes go cold. She falls over, and just before I pass out, I see a large hole in the center of her eyes. The room smelled of gunpowder and smoke, and an eerie feeling takes over the room.
As she stepped into the bustling mall, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement wash over her. The bright lights, the vibrant colors, and the sounds of chatter and laughter filled the air. Surrounded by a sea of shoppers, she made her way through the crowded aisle, taking in the sights and sounds of the mall. She was wearing a big smile on her face, feeling happy and content, ready to embark on a day of shopping and adventure. The mall was her favorite place to be, and she loved nothing more than exploring the various stores and trying on new clothes. Her first stop was in a store that specialized in trendy and fashionable clothing. The store was filled with the latest styles and designs, and she couldn't resist trying on several outfits. The sound of the changing room door opening and closing echoed throughout the store, and she giggled with delight as she twirled in front of the mirror. Next, she visited a store that sold beauty products and makeup. She was in awe of the selection of products, and spent hours browsing the aisles, trying to out different lipstick and eyeshadow. The sound of the cashier ringing up each purchase filled the air, and she felt like a kid in a candy store. After a busy morning of shopping, she made her way to the food court, where the smell of delicious food filled the air. She decided to treat herself to a big juicy burger, and a large order of fries. The sound of sizzling meat and the sound of customers chatting and laughing made her feel right at home. It was a great day, and she felt fulfilled. Happy and content, she took her time eating and people watching, taking in the sights and sounds of the mall. She couldn't wait to see what other surprises the day had in store for her. This was what happiness felt like, and she was grateful for every moment of it. She decided to take a detour and check out another store that she felt she had never seen before. As she stepped inside, her eyes were immediately drawn to a shiny gadget on a nearby display. It was a sleek and futuristic device with a bright screen and multiple buttons. She picked it up, examined it, feeling its weight and texture in her hands. Just then, a store associate approached her with a friendly smile. "Can I help you find anything?" the associate asked. "Yes, I was just admiring this gadget. What can you tell me about it?" the girl replied, still holding the device. "That's our latest model, with advanced features and a long battery life. It's perfect for anyone who wants to stay connected and organized," the associate explained, pointing out some of the key features. The girl was impressed and began asking more questions about the gadget's capabilities. The store associate was knowledgeable and helpful, and she appreciated the time he was taking to answer all her questions. As the store associate went to ring up the gadget, the girl suddenly noticed an older woman just outside the store, watching her with a strange look in her eyes. The woman was disheveled. Her appearance was messy, with wild hair and dirty clothes. Her eyes were wide open, and she licked her lips as she stared at the girl. The girl felt a chill run down her spine, and she took a step back, feeling scared. The older woman continued to stare at her, mouthing something that she couldn't make out. The girl's heart began to pound in her chest, and she felt that she needed to get away from the woman as fast as she could. She quickly gathered her belongings and ran out of the store, not looking back. The experience left her shaken, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by the strange woman. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like the woman was trying to tell her something that was deeply unsettling. Feeling uncomfortable with the strange woman's gaze, the girl decided to test her out. She pretended to be browsing other items in another store, hiding behind some display shelves, and reading the labels on the boxes. The store associate was busy greeting a customer, so she thought she was safe. To her horror, the girl realized that the new customer was the older woman. The woman seemed to be looking for something specific, and she was scanning the shelves as the determined look in her face. The girl tried to remain calm, but her heart was pounding in her chest. Suddenly, it was as if the woman could hear her heart. The woman locked eyes with the girl and began staring at her. The woman didn't move. She just stood there and stared, her eyes piercing and unblinking. The girl felt a shiver run down her spine, feeling creeped out by the woman's intense gaze. Without a moment's hesitation, the girl quickly walked out of the store and into the crowd. She power walked through the mall, looking over her shoulder to see if she was being followed. To her shock, she saw the older woman still following her with a frown and a piercing stare. The woman was walking quickly, her eyes never leaving the girl. She was relentless, determined to keep up with her. The girl was starting to feel panicked, her heart racing as she tried to lose the woman in the crowd. She ducked into different stores, hoping to escape the woman's gaze. But no matter where she went, the woman was always there, following her with a determined look. The girl couldn't understand why the woman was fixated on her, or what she wanted. All she knew was that she needed to get out of the mall as quickly as possible. The girl finally made her way to the parking lot, and for a moment she thought she had lost the older woman. She breathed a sigh of relief, and she got into the car and started the engine. However, as she checked her rearview mirror, she saw the older woman again. This time, the woman was licking her lips on the back window, her eyes open with a glee. She continued to lick the window. The girl screamed and jumped out of the car, running towards an emergency phone. The older woman immediately followed, jumping forward and laughing in a hoarse, raspy voice.
"It's so yummy!"
she shouted.
"It's a taste! It's just a small taste!"
Terrified, the girl shouted at the older woman to get away from her. She looked around for help, but there was no one in sight. The older woman was getting closer, and she was laughing in pursuit. The girl could hear the sound of footsteps, the crunching of gravel underfoot, and the older woman's raspy laughter echoing in her ears. The girl ran as fast and as far as she could towards the emergency phone. Her heart pounding in her chest, she could feel the older woman's hot breath on the back of her neck, and she was screaming for help. The sounds of the parking lot were all around her, the honking of the horns, the screeching of tires, and the pounding of her own footsteps. She reached the emergency phone, gasping for breath, and picked it up with shaking hands. She was about to dial for help when she heard the older woman's laughter right behind her. She spun around and saw the woman, her eyes filled with hunger and her hands reaching for her. The girl screamed and ran, not daring to look back, until she was safely inside her car and speeding away from the mall. The girl decides she needs to go to the gym to burn off some of her anxiety and stress. She remembers that the gym is just 11 miles away. She realizes that she is not dressed for the workout, but decides she can buy a pair of sweatpants and sweatshirt inside the gym. As the girl pulls into the gym, she's already starting to feel better about the situation. She enters the gym and greets the employee. As she searches her purse for her wallet, she realizes that it's missing. Did it fall out at the mall? The employee lets her know that it can be charged to her monthly bill if she wanted to still get the items. The girl, frustrated, agreed. After she changed into her clothes, she decides on warming up on the treadmill. She starts feeling better and enjoys her view of the sunset just outside the gym. She admires the see-through glass walls and takes in a deep breath. After 27 minutes on the treadmill, she sighs and realizes it's almost time to get off and begin her workout. She takes another look outside and sees a figure looking in. She tells herself it must be a potential customer interested in joining. She gets off the treadmill and heads to the mats to begin her ab workout. As she approaches the mats near the glass walls, she realizes it's a familiar face. It's the older woman, and she's staring inside. And in her right hand is the girl's wallet. The woman begins staring at the girl and begins licking her wallet. Terrified by the sight, the girl runs to the front desk and cries for the employee to call the police. The employee gets on and is speaking with the dispatcher. As the older lady bursts into the gym and grabs the girl's hair, the girl screams as the older woman begins trying to swallow the girl's hair. She grunts and moans as she attempts to swallow the girl's hair. The girl, paralyzed with fear, is crying and screaming. A few gym members begin grabbing the older woman, commanding her to stop. The woman begins screaming and choking on the chunk of hair. It's chaos, and the girl tries pulling away. But the woman mounts on top of the girl and continues to try and eat her hair. As she's doing this, she begins to gag and vomits on the girl. One of the gym members punches the older woman and has no effect. The woman growls at the gym member as blood runs down her nose and onto the screaming girl. Just then, the police march in and taser the woman. They remove her from the building and into the car. Upon returning, the officers let the girl know that the older woman escaped from a hospital and was extremely unstable. The girl, covered in blood and vomit, decides to go to the hospital. As she rode away in the ambulance, she couldn't help but cry and realize that she could never look at shopping the same way, and begs for you to learn from her lesson, and to always be mindful about the harmful dangers that could be lingering near you at any point in time, at any place. Just don't ever let your guard down.
"51-year-old Klaus Stromberg was an exhausted dock worker, with long hair that fell around his thin face. He lived in poverty in 19th century London, where the cold winter nights were especially cruel. On one such evening, Klaus was at home, relaxing by the fireplace with his loyal companion, a German shepherd named Dante. They sat together in comfortable silence, Klaus lost in a book, while Dante lay by his side. The fire flickered and danced, casting long shadows on the walls. As the wind howled outside, Klaus took a sip of his warm tea. He smiled, grateful for the peacefulness of the moment. He reached down to pet Dante, who lifted his head and licked Klaus's hand. Klaus couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for his loyal companion, who had been by his side through so much. But their peaceful evening was soon interrupted by a stranger lurking and spying on them from outside. Klaus could hear the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow outside his window, and he knew it was not just any passerby. "Who's there?" Klaus called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's me, Klaus. Let me in," a twisted voice replied from outside. Klaus's heart began to race as he realized that the stranger standing outside his door was none other than the stalker from the docks where he worked. The stalker had a notorious reputation known for his erratic behavior and personal grudge against Klaus. Klaus had tried to ignore him, hoping that he would eventually leave him alone. But the stalker had been relentless in his pursuit of Klaus. As the stalker began to bang on the door and shout insults, Klaus could feel a mixture of anger and fear rising within him. The stranger's taunts grew increasingly aggressive, and Klaus knew that the stalker's twisted mind had a personal vendetta against him. Klaus tried to reason with the stalker, pleading with him to leave him alone, but the stalker's only response was a maniacal laughter. The environment around Klaus was silent, deserted, with not a soul in sight for miles. The darkness of the night enveloped him, and Klaus felt a sense of isolation and vulnerability wash over him. His dog, Dante, sensing his fear, began to bark ferociously, the hairs on his back standing up as he prepared for an attack. "You think you can hide from me, Klaus? I'll find you, and I'll make you pay for what you did to me," the stalker shouted, his voice filled with rage. Klaus could see the stalker's distorted face through the peephole, twisted in anger and hatred. Klaus knew that he had to act fast. He couldn't let this man continue to torment him. He held onto Dante tightly, hoping his dog would protect him. The stalker seemed to get more aggressive with each passing moment. Klaus knew that he had to protect himself and his dog. He couldn't let the stalker continue to terrorize him. He went outside, Dante by his side, determined to confront the stalker. He searched the area, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the stalker. But he was nowhere to be found. Klaus felt a sense of unease, but he refused to let the stalker's taunts and threats get the best of him. He knew that he had to take control of the situation. The neighborhood where Klaus lived was a poor one. Abandoned buildings made of wood were falling apart. Rat feces littered the ground. The only source of light was from the full moon and the lantern that Klaus was carrying. The eerie shadows cast by the moonlight made the already dilapidated buildings look even more menacing. Klaus could hear the sound of rats scurrying in the darkness and the creaking of old wooden boards beneath his feet. As he walked around, he could feel the stalker's presence. Like a dark cloud hanging over him, the stalker's rage was palpable, and Klaus could feel his madness emanating from the shadows. Klaus knew that this was his chance to finally put an end to this. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves and gain enough courage to finally confront his enemy. He called out to the stalker, his voice filled with anger and frustration. "Come out and face me, you fucking coward. I ain't afraid of you and your fucking mental illness." Klaus held Dante tightly, the dog ready to defend him. If needed, Klaus's heart was pounding in his chest, but he refused to back down. He waited for the stalker's response, ready for whatever may come. The dim light of the lantern in his hand was the only source of light in this abandoned neighborhood. They were looking for the stalker. Klaus searched the area for the stalker, but he couldn't find any trace of him. The only thing he could see was footprints in the snow. Eventually, they faded away. Klaus called out to the stalker, but there was no response. He searched for any sign of him, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Klaus felt a sense of frustration and disappointment wash over him. He had been so sure that he would finally be able to confront the stalker and put an end to his torment. But it seemed that the stalker had outsmarted him yet again. He headed back into his home, Dante by his side. The dog seemed to have calmed down, as if sensing that the danger had passed. Klaus couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. He knew that the stalker's threat was still looming over him, but he knew that he would have to be more prepared next time. He couldn't let the stalker continue to torment him. He locked the door behind him, tried to shake off the chill of the night. He knew that he had to keep watch. The stalker could come back at any moment. The wind outside howled and whistled as Klaus peered out his window, desperately searching for any sign of the stalker. The snow was falling thickly, obscuring his vision, and making it difficult for him to see more than a few feet in front of him. Klaus knew that the stalker was out there, somewhere, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Suddenly, Dante began to growl once again. Klaus's heart skipped a beat as a loud crash against the front door startled him. He heard laughter coming from outside and realized that the stalker was back. Without hesitation, Klaus swung the door open and began searching for any sign of the stalker. He called out to him, his voice filled with anger and determination. "I know you're out there. Show yourself." He made his way down the deserted streets. The only sound was the crunching of the snow under his feet. Klaus could feel the stalker's presence, like a dark cloud hanging over him. The stalker's madness seemed to be emanating from the shadows. Filling the air with the sense of dread, Klaus knew that he had to be on his guard. He could not let the stalker catch him off guard. As Klaus walked, he could hear the stalker's voice taunting him. "You cannot escape the shadows, Klaus. They will always find you and make you pay for your sins." Klaus's blood ran cold as the stalker's words echoed in his mind, leaving him wondering what he meant by those words. He knew that the stalker was not going to stop. He was not going to give up until he had his revenge. Klaus's heart was pounding in his chest as he made his way outside, his hand tightly gripping Dante's collar. The dog was agitated, sensing danger that was lurking in the shadows. Klaus could feel the tension in the air, knowing he had to be careful. Klaus could hear strange sounds in the distance, like a faint whispering. He couldn't make out what they were saying, but it gave him chills. The wind was blowing fiercely, making the branches of the trees rustle, and a faint howling. Klaus continued to search the streets, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to find the stalker before it was too late. He searched the nearby alleyway, but he couldn't find any sign of the stalker. The snow was falling thicker now, and Klaus could barely see a few feet in front of him. As the night wore on, Klaus's fear and paranoia grew. He knew that the stalker was out there, waiting for that perfect opportunity. That's all that he could think about, and that's all that kept coming to his mind. Klaus could feel the tension in the air, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the twisted plan reached its deadly conclusion. He knew he had to find this, to protect himself. The strength from within. Finally, Klaus heard sound coming from an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. He knew that it was the stalker, and he prepared himself for the final confrontation. Klaus and Dante entered the warehouse, cautiously. Klaus's heart still pounding in his chest as he made his way through the dark, musty interior. He could hear the stalker's ragged breathing, and he knew that he was getting closer. The stalker was waiting for Klaus in the shadows. His madness and anger were evident in his twisted face. Klaus could see the hatred in his eyes. He knew that the stalker was not going to stop. Klaus and Dante fought back. With Klaus and Dante both determined to defend themselves against the stalker, Klaus, with his hair covering his face, sweat ran down his eyes. He began to tear up. His eyes were sunken, tired, a testament to the long hours he had spent working at the docks. His clothes worn, but he held himself with a sense of determination and pride. Dante, on the other hand, the fierce German shepherd, fur black as night, eyes sharp, muscles were coiled, ready for action. He stood at the side of Klaus, growling low in his throat, ready to defend his master at all costs. The warehouse, an eerie and abandoned place, cobwebs hanging from the rafters, a musty smell that hung in the air. The floorboards creaked underfoot. Klaus could feel the tension, the only light, which came from a few flickering candles casting along the walls. The stalker was waiting for Klaus, his face contorted with anger and madness, his eyes wild, filled with hatred. His hands were clenched into fists. A rather large man with thick, greasy hair, a thick beard, and a tattered cord that hung from that were caked with mud. You can't hide from me, Klaus. As I've told you before, the stalker spat in his face filled with rage. I'm going to make you pay up for what you have done to me. Klaus could feel the stalker's anger and hatred. I don't know what you're talking about, Klaus said, trying to keep his voice steady. I've never done anything to hurt you. The stalker laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the warehouse. You think I'm going to believe that? You think I don't know what you did? You have ruined my life, Klaus, and now I'm going to ruin yours. Klaus could see the madness in the eyes of the stalker, and he knew that he had to be careful with his next words. He stepped forward, trying to keep a safe distance between himself and the stalker. I'm warning you, stay away from me and my dog, Klaus said, his voice filled with a sense of determination. The stalker's face turned to a sneer. Or what? You think you can stop this? I'll show you who's in charge here. With that, the stalker lunged at Klaus, his hands reaching for his throat. Klaus was quick to react, sidestepping the stalker's attack and striking him with a swift punch to the face. The stalker stumbled back, his nose bleeding, his eyes filled with rage. Dante, sensing the danger, lunged at the stalker, biting him in the arm and pulling him back. The stalker howled in pain and fury, but Klaus was able to strike him once again, this time knocking him down unconscious. Klaus and Dante were both breathing hard, their hearts pounding. Klaus and Dante were both relieved that the stalker was finally unconscious, but they knew that their fight was far from over. Klaus's knuckles were bruised and bleeding from the punches which he had thrown. Dante had a few cuts and bite marks on his arm from the fight. Klaus's emotions were running high, a mix of fear and anger, and relief. He couldn't believe that he had been forced to defend himself against such a twisted and violent individual. He felt a sense of disgust towards the stalker, and a sense of gratitude towards Dante for his bravery. The stalker was still unconscious, but Klaus could see the anger and hatred contorting his face. Even in his state, Klaus knew that the stalker was not going to give up. He would be back, and Klaus had to be ready for him. Klaus knew that he had to find a way to protect himself, to be better prepared for the next confrontation. He couldn't stay in the warehouse. He had to get out before the stalker woke. Klaus grabbed Dante by the collar, quickly made his way out of the warehouse. The snow was falling. Still, now even thicker than before. As they walked, Klaus could feel the stalker's presence like a dark cloud hanging over him. He knew that the stalker would eventually find him. As he made his way through the deserted streets, the only sound that was crunching of the snow under his feet. Klaus knew he had to find a safe place to hide. He couldn't stay out in the streets. The cold was affecting Dante. Dante, now limping and shaking from the cold. The snow was up to his chest. He could find shelter. He had to find shelter. He made his way to an old saloon that had been closed for many years on the edge of town. Klaus knew that it was too dangerous to wander the streets any longer. It was the only place that he could provide a decent shelter from the weather. As they entered the building, Klaus couldn't help but feel that he had not escaped. He knew that the stalker was not far behind, and he had to be ready for him. Klaus and Dante made their way to the top floor. Klaus barricaded the door with whatever he could find. Klaus knew that it wouldn't hold the stalker for long, but at least it would buy him some time. Klaus sat against the door. He couldn't help shake the feeling of anxiety and frustration. He could sense it was only a matter of time before he was found once again. Klaus was determined to protect himself, no matter the cost, no matter what it took. He knew that the night was going to be a long one, and he braced himself for what was to come. The place, run down, with peeling wallpaper, of course, creaked underfoot, and Klaus could feel the dampness in the air. Webs consumed the walls. The smell of mildew and mold was overwhelming. Just as they began to settle in, Klaus thought that maybe the stalker gave up. Klaus began to relax. He saw Dante was now fast asleep. As Klaus closed his eyes, a loud crash shattered his peaceful slumber. Klaus could hear the stalker's voice shouting and cursing as he searched for them just outside the saloon. Klaus knew that the stalker was getting closer, and he had to act fast. This time, he was not going to run. He quickly made his way downstairs towards the racket, and to the bar, and hid behind it, pulling Dante closely with him. The stalker's voice grew louder as he made his way into the salon. "I know you're in here, Klaus. I see your tracks," he shouted. "I will kill you both." Klaus could hear the stalker's heavy footsteps as he made his way closer to the bar. Klaus's heart beating once again. He reached for the nearest object that he could find. An old dusty bottle of mead. He knew that he had to defend himself no matter what it took. The stalker's face appeared above the bar, twisted with madness. Klaus swung the bottle, hitting the stalker in the head, and the stalker's body went limp, falling to the floor. Klaus didn't know what came over him. He had to hide the body, and he couldn't let anyone find out what he had done. Klaus quickly dragged the stalker's body behind the bar and hid it under the old books and debris. He found these things upstairs. He knew that it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best that he could do. Nobody had used the salon for some time, and he felt confident that he could keep this a secret between him and his loyal companion. Klaus and Dante quickly made their way out of the saloon. He ran through the deserted streets. He knew that they couldn't stay in the city. He had to get far away from the stalker as possible. Klaus knew that the nightmare was not over, but he was just glad that the stalker was dead. He protected himself and Dante, and he knew that he was well enough alive to tell the tale, and for that he was grateful. He knew that he would never forget that night, the fear, the paranoia that had consumed him. He knew that he would never forget the stalker's face and the feeling of the bottle as it connected with his skull. Klaus knew that he would always remember the feeling of relief when the stalker's body had finally gone still, and the weight of the books as they had covered the stalker's body, hiding it from the world. Klaus knew what he had done was right and just in order to survive, but the guilt of taking a life would always stay with him. Klaus thought that that night would be over, and that he would be able to forget about the stalker and move on with his life. However, the nightmares began almost immediately. Every night, Klaus would dream of the stalker's face. The feeling of the bottle, as it connected to the skull, haunted him. He would wake up in a cold sweat, and his mind consumed by the guilt and the fear. Klaus couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility for the stalker's death. He knew that he hadn't done what he'd done to survive, but the guilt of taking a life was consuming him. He couldn't stand the thought of living with the weight of that guilt on his shoulders for the rest of his life. Klaus's life became a downward spiral. He stopped going to work and stopped eating. He was consumed by the guilt of the stalker's death. The nightmares continued to haunt him every night. Finally, Klaus came to the conclusion. He knew that there was only one way to escape the guilt and the nightmares. He couldn't live with the weight of what he had done any longer. Klaus wrote a note explaining his actions and guilt, left it on the table next to his bed. He took a rope and hung himself in his bedroom. Dante was the only one who was there to witness his death, and he howled in sorrow. Klaus's absence raised questions, and some dock workers went to his home to investigate. They discovered that Klaus's door was opened. His lovely companion was found laying underneath a hanging corpse. Initially, his death was ruled as suicide, and his note was found by the authorities. The guilt of taking a life had finally consumed Klaus, and he couldn't find a way to live with it. His death served as a tragic reminder of the weight of actions and consequences that come with them. However, as the authorities were investigating Klaus's death, they found strange inconsistencies in the story. They found no trace of the stalker's body behind the bar, no evidence of a struggle or fight in the saloon. They also found that the note Klaus left behind was not in his handwriting. When comparing his handwriting to the notes he kept at work, which detailed shipment inventory. As they continued their investigation, they received a tip from an anonymous source. that led them to a rundown house on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, they found the stalker sitting in a rocking chair by the window, a twisted smile in his face. The stalker explained to the authorities that he had planned Klaus's death all along. He had been watching Klaus and Dante from the very beginning, manipulating events, pushing Klaus to the brink until he was driven to take his own life. He had orchestrated the entire thing, down to the note left behind. The stalker revealed that he had been an ex-employer of Klaus. He had been fired for stealing from the company over 20 years ago. He had an obsession with Klaus. He wanted to see him suffer. He had staged his own death and hid his body in the old saloon until Klaus had killed him. Then, he moved back to his house. He had been watching Klaus the entire time, enjoying his descent into madness and eventual suicide. The authorities were shocked and horrified at the stalker's actions. They arrested him and charged him with Klaus's murder. As the stalker was led away in shackles, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction for his plan. It had worked, and Klaus was gone. He felt that he had finally won, and Klaus had lost. Something he had wanted since the beginning of his descent. Klaus's death was a tragedy and a reminder of the power of manipulation and devastation it can cause. The stalker's actions were a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of men. Klaus and Dante's story was one of love, loyalty, and sacrifice, and a cautionary tale of how far a person can be pushed by an obsession with another person. It was a dark and stormy night in 1986. The rain was coming down in the streets, pounding against the pavement and drowning out all other sounds in the city. Inside, a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, a lone figure sat nursing a whiskey on the rocks. He was a criminal, a man with a past as dark and mysterious as the shadows that seemed to cling to him. His name was Jack. He had been a criminal for most of his life, always looking over his shoulder, always one step ahead of the law. But tonight, something was different. Jack could feel in his bones a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. Maybe it was the weather, maybe it was just his own paranoia getting the better of him. Whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something bad was going to happen. As he sat there lost in thought, the door to the bar burst open. A group of men stormed in. They were a rough-looking crowd. Cold, hard-eyes, unmistakable air of danger about them. Jack had never seen them before, but he knew that they were trouble. "What's going on here?" the leader of the group sneered, his eyes scanning the room. "Who the hell are you?" Jack knew that he had to play it cool. He didn't know who these men were, or what they wanted from him, but he knew that he had to protect himself. "I'm just a regular guy," Jack says, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just trying to have a drink in this place." The leader looked at Jack for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he studied him. Then he let out a cold laugh. "You think you're better than us or something? You think you can just walk in here and act like it's your own place? You don't know who the hell you're dealing with." Jack knew that he had to be careful. These men were strangers to him, and he had no idea what their intentions were. He had to find a way to get out of the situation before it escalated any further. Jack's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He knew he couldn't just sit there and wait. He couldn't wait for them to make their first move. He had to make action and protect himself. "I'm sorry," Jack said, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll just finish my drink and I'll be on my way." The leader of the group sneered and stepped closer to Jack. "You think you're just gonna walk the hell out of here? We haven't even told you what the hell we want yet." Jack's heart raced as he realized that these men weren't just random thugs. They had some kind of agenda, and here he was in the middle of it. He tried to keep his cool, and he knew that he was in a dangerous situation. "What do you want from me?" Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady once again. The leader leaned in close, his breath hot on Jack's face. "We want you to get the hell out of our place, but not without paying first, of course. There's a tax, you know. It's time you face your consequences." Jack's mind raced as he tried to understand what the leader was talking about. He had no idea what he was being accused of or what these men were. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've never seen you before in my life." The leader sneered and stepped back. "Don't play dumb with me," he spat. "We all know about the taxes. We all know that you have to pay to drink in this establishment. You and your little operation can get the hell out of here, but not without paying first, as I told you." Jack knew that he couldn't act without causing some sort of distress. These men were dangerous, and he didn't want to stick around to find out what they had. He quickly scanned the room, looking for a way out. His eyes fell on a window at the back of the bar, partially hidden by a dirty curtain. Without hesitation, Jack jumped out of his seat and ran towards the window. He pushed aside a curtain and smashed through the glass with his elbow, the shards raining down on his arm. As he clambered through the opening, he hit the ground, running, and didn't look back, his heart pounding in his chest as he sprinted through the rain-soaked streets. He could hear the gang members shouting and cursing at him, but he didn't slow down. He knew that they were close. They were close on his heels, and he had to put much distance between them as possible. Jack knew that he had to come up with a plan, and fast. He couldn't keep running forever. He needed to put an end to this once and for all. He searched a nearby building. He had taken refuge in, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon. He found an old rusty pipe and a broken bottle. Not much, but it would have to do. His anger, embarrassment, and pride were boiling within him. As he made his way back to the bar, he knew that the gang would be there. He had to make them pay for what they had done to him. He pushed open the door of the bar, the pipe and bottle tightly gripped in his hand. The gang members were sitting there, laughing, drinking, oblivious to the danger that was about to befall them. Jack strode towards them, his eyes locked on the gang leader. "Hey, remember me?" he says with his voice. The leader sneered. "Yeah, I remember you. You're the punk that tried to run away from us." The gang members reached for their weapons, but Jack was faster. He swung the pipe and broke, launching himself into a fierce fight. He fought with ferocity and didn't know what he had. His anger and embarrassment fueling his strength. He landed blow after blow. He was just about to finish the gang leader when he heard the sound of tires screeching outside. Jack's heart sank as he realized that the rest of the gang had arrived as backup. Suddenly, the door burst open and a car came careening into the room, nearly hitting Jack. Shots fired from the car. Jack quickly ducked behind a table, using it as a shield. He could hear the bullets whizzing past his head, the sound of glass shattering, and the screams of the remaining gang members. He knew that he had to act fast if he wanted to survive. With a burst of adrenaline, Jack lunged from behind the table, grabbed a hold of a gang member who had foolishly left his gun lying near a nearby table. Jack quickly overpowered him, taking the gun and turning it on the remaining gang members. He fired rapidly, taking out the remaining gang members one by one. The sound of gunfire filled the room. The smell of gunpowder was thick in the air. He didn't stop until every last one of them was down. Jack knew that he needed to get out of the area fast before the police arrived. He stumbled out of the bar, the gun still in his hand. He could feel the blood trickling down. by his side, the result of a bullet gaze. He knew he needed medical attention, but first he had to put some distance between himself and the crime scene. He quickly made his way back to the alley and the side streets, trying to shake off any potential pursuit. He could hear sirens in the distance, and he knew that the police were on their way, and they were on their way fast. He was running. He spotted a nearby dumpster. He knew it wouldn't be the most comfortable of hideouts, but it would have to do for now. He climbed into the dumpster, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was exhausted, wounded, but he knew that he couldn't rest easy. He had made some powerful enemies tonight, and they would stop at nothing to find and eliminate him. He decided to sleep it off until morning, when he could catch a cab, make his escape. So he closed his eyes and tried to get some rest. Though his mind was racing with thoughts of danger he was still in. The next day, Jack emerged from the dumpster, his clothes stained, his body aching. He made his way to the nearest cab stand and hailed a taxi. He got in, gave the driver an address. He knew that he had to keep a low profile if he wanted to stay alive. But his luck had run out. He was spotted getting into the cab shortly after his arrival. He was seen entering a gas station shortly after. Several men who had been waiting for him grabbed him and dragged him into a waiting car. Jack tried to fight back, but he was outnumbered. Many years have passed since Jack's disappearance, but the mystery surrounding it still lingers. Some say he was killed by his enemies, his body disposed of and never found. Others are a bit more optimistic, and believe that he escaped and went into hiding, living a life on the run, continuing to always look over his shoulder. No one knows for sure. Rumors and theories have circulated over these years, but no concrete evidence has ever been found. Some say he's still out there, waiting for that opportunity to take his revenge. Others believe that he met a tragic end, his fate forever sealed in the darkness of the night. His family and friends were left with nothing but questions, heartache, never finding closure for the loss of their loved one. They were left to wonder what could have been if things had gone differently that fateful night. Jack's story has become a cautionary tale, a warning of the dangers of the life of crime, and the consequences of crossing the wrong people. It serves as a reminder that no one is untouchable, and that the past will always catch up with you in the end.
I grew up in a small, tight-knit community in rural Colorado during the mid-1980s. Life was simple, and I couldn't have asked for a more perfect childhood. My family and I lived in a cabin, surrounded by trees. The cabin had been in our family for generations. It was a warm summer night, and I was lying in my bed, listening to the crickets chirping outside my window. The cabin was nestled in the mountains. The smell of pine trees and wildflowers filled in the air, and the stars shone brightly in the clear night sky. It was peaceful and serene, the perfect place for my family and me to raise our children. But as I drifted off to sleep, little did I know that my peaceful world was about to be shattered. I woke up to the sound of someone trying to break into our house. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but as the sound grew louder, I knew it was real. Quickly, I got out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and made my way to the window. I peeked through the blinds, and there I saw a figure standing outside, trying to force open the door. He was a tall man with a menacing look in his face, a hood pulled over his head. I couldn't completely see his face, but I could feel his gaze boring into me. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to act fast. I ran to my parents' room, where my brothers were sleeping. I went to wake them, but they were already awake. Having heard the commotion, my oldest brother quickly grabbed our father's shotgun and told me to stay put. He and my mother went to confront the intruder. But it was too late. The man had already broken into the house.
could hear the sound of shattering glass and furniture being overturned. My heart was pounding. I heard my brother's screams. I was alone and scared. I had to do something. I quickly grabbed my phone to call the police, but the line was dead. I was trapped and alone. I could hear the intruder getting closer and closer. I had to think fast. I remembered there was an old landline phone in the kitchen, and I knew it was my only chance. I quickly made my way to the kitchen, trying to stay quiet and avoid detection. But as I reached for the phone, the intruder appeared in front of me. He was covered in blood. His eyes were wild. He lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him. And grab the phone. I dialed 911 and frantically told them what was happening. I could hear the intruder getting closer and closer, but I knew help was on the way. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I had to protect myself. I grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife, and prepared myself for the fight. I could feel my adrenaline pumping through my veins, and I knew this was it. It was a fight for my life. The intruder lunged at me again, and I fought back with all my might. I stabbed him with the knife, and he fell to the ground. I could hear the sirens of the police cars in the distance. The intruder was motionless on the floor. The police arrived just in time and took him away. The next morning, the police revealed that the man was a serial killer that had been on the run for months. He had targeted my cabinet, and I was lucky to have escaped. But my luck would not last forever. As the days passed, I couldn't shake off the feeling that the intruder was still out there, watching me, and I was right. One night, as I was walking home from work, I saw a figure in the shadows, watching me from a distance. My heart raced as I recognized the hooded figure from the night of the break-in. He had escaped from police custody, and now he was hunting me. I tried to run, but he was too fast. He got up to me and lunged at me, but I managed to fight him off. I kicked and screamed, but he was too strong. He overpowered me and dragged me into the woods. I was trapped with no way to call for help, and the nearest house was miles away. I knew that this was it, the end, but I refused to give up. I fought back with all my might, using everything I had learned from that fateful night. I kicked, I punched, I scratched and clawed, anything to get away. But he was relentless. He seemed to enjoy my suffering, relishing in the fear and pain that he was causing. Just then I thought it was over. Once again, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police had finally arrived, but it was too late. The intruder had managed to escape yet again, and I was left alone, bruised and battered in the middle of the woods. I was taken to the hospital and received treatment for my injuries. A few weeks went by, and I began to feel things go back to normal. A nurse walked in and shared the good news with me that I would be discharged in a few hours, if I could call someone to give me a ride. If I could have a ride home, that would be great, on account that I was still on strong medication. I agreed, and I decided to call my friend Jenny. As I was discharged from the hospital, I couldn't wait to go home and finally put that terrifying night behind me. My friend Jenny offered to drive me home, and I gratefully accepted. As we made our way to the hospital, I couldn't help but feel a sense of release wash over me. "It's so good we'll be leaving this place," I said to Jenny, a smile creeping up on my face. "I know, right? You had me worried there for a bit," Jenny replied, returning my smile. As we drove through the winding mountain roads, we chatted about trivial things, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. It was a beautiful day. I was finally starting to feel myself again. But that feeling of peace was short-lived. As he rounded a bend, I noticed a car following us. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as we drove further, the car stayed behind us. My heart started to race as I realized it was the same car that had been following us for the last few miles. "Jenny, do you see that car behind us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I see it. Maybe it's just a coincidence," Jenny replied. But I could see the worry etched on her face. We tried to shake the car, but it stayed behind us, always just a few car lengths back. My fear was turning into panic. I knew it was him. The intruder had found me. "Jenny, we need to lose the car now," I said, my voice shaking. Jenny nodded and stepped on the gas, swerving through the Nevero mountain roads. But the car behind us kept pace, always just a few car lengths back. We were running out of time. As we approached a sharp turn, I could see the edge of the cliff looming ahead. I knew this was our only chance. "Jenny, when we get to that turn, swerve off the road and head for the cliff," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. Jenny didn't question me. She knew I had a plan. As we reached the turn, she swerved off the road, and we headed straight for the cliff. The car behind us followed, but it was too late. The driver had no time to react. As we reached the edge of the cliff, I kicked open the door and jumped out of the car. I heard the intruder's car crash into the rocks below, and I felt the hot wind rushing past me as I fell. I hit the rocks hard, but I was alive. I looked up and saw the intruder's body lying on the rocks below. His skull exploded from impact. I was safe. The nightmare was finally over. I knew that the memories of that terrifying night would always stay with me, but I also knew that I had survived. I had fought back and won. I was strong, and I was alive. "20-year-old Victor Van Bremen was a typical college student, busy with classes and exams. One day, he was driving to campus. He encountered an unexpected and bewildering situation. A driver pulled up alongside him, honking loudly and gesturing for Victor to roll down his window. Confused, Victor complied, only to be met with an angry and agitated stranger. The encounter left Victor stunned, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. This unexpected event was just the beginning of a series of strange encounters that would test Victor's resolve and change his life forever. Victor, taken aback by the driver's hostility, immediately apologized, not knowing what he had done to warrant such treatment. Despite his efforts to calm the situation, the driver continued to hurl insults and threats at him. Victor tried to reason with the driver, asking what he had done to deserve such anger, but the driver only became more incensed. The environment was tense and hostile. The two cars were stopped next to each other, on a busy road, honking horns and shouting voices, creating a chaotic atmosphere. Cars were passing by slowly to see what was happening, but quickly accelerating to avoid getting caught in the commotion. Victor felt overwhelmed and trapped, unsure of how to defuse the situation. He desperately wished that the encounter would end, and he could continue on his way to class. The situation escalated, and the driver finally sped away, leaving Victor shaken and disturbed by the experience. He continued to his class, but the memory of the encounter lingered with him throughout the rest of the day. He couldn't understand why someone would behave so irrationally, and he was left wondering what he could have done differently to avoid such a confrontation. Despite his confusion, Victor was determined to move forward and put the experience behind him, not knowing that this was only the beginning of a long journey of self-discovery and personal growth. As Victor settled into his seat for his next class, he suddenly heard a familiar voice behind him. He turned around to see the driver from earlier marching towards him, his eyes fixed on Victor. The driver was a tall man, with broad shoulders and a muscular build. He had a rugged, unkempt appearance, with a scruffy beard and a wild look in his eyes. He was dressed in a leather jacket and jeans, a stark contrast to the students around him in their academic attire. The school setting was a bustling college campus, with students hurling to their next classes, books and backpacks in hand. The atmosphere was lively and energetic, with the sounds of laughter and chatter filling in the air. But all of that changed as the driver approached Victor, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the students around them. They stopped what they were doing, and an uneasy silence descended upon the room as everyone turned to watch the scene unfold. Victor's heart sank. As he realized that the driver had followed him to class, he felt a wave of fear and uncertainty wash over him, not knowing what the driver's intentions were. As the driver approached, the students around them quickly gathered their belongings and left the room, leaving Victor alone to face the intimidating figure. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound of the footsteps of the driver as he approached Victor's seat. As the driver reached behind Victor's seat, the professor who had been writing on the board turned around, his expression of confusion and surprise. "Can I help you, sir?" the professor asked, his tone polite but firm. "I need to speak with this young man," the driver said, gesturing towards Victor. "I'm sorry, but this is a classroom, and we are in the middle of a lecture," the professor replied. "I'm afraid you'll have to come back later." "This won't take long," the driver insisted, his voice growing more aggressive. "I have a bone to pick with him." "I'm sorry, sir, but I must ask you to leave," the professor said firmly, stepping in front of Victor to block the driver's path. "This is a place of learning, and I will not tolerate any disruptions in my classroom." "I'm not leaving until I have my say," the driver declared, his eyes blazing with anger. The professor and the driver stood facing each other, the tension between them palpable. The room was silent, everyone watching the scene unfold, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, campus security arrived, and the driver was escorted out of the room. The professor continued with his lecture, but the incident had shaken the students, and the mood in the room was somber and subdued. Victor couldn't focus on the lecture, his thoughts consumed by the encounter and the driver's mysterious motivations. As the security guards tackled the driver, the students in the room gasped in shock and surprise. The driver, caught off guard by the sudden attack, stumbled and fell to the ground. Grappling with the security guard, the two men struggled, exchanging blows just outside the classroom. Suddenly, the door to the classroom burst open once again, and the security guard burst in, shouting for the driver to stop. The guard was a tall and burly man dressed in a uniform with a badge on his chest. He moved quickly, tackling the driver once again, bringing him down to the ground in a swift and well-executed maneuver. "Everyone stay back!" the guard shouted, his voice echoing through the room. The driver struggled against the guard's grips, shouting and cursing, but the guard was relentless. He expertly restrained the driver, using handcuffs to secure his hands behind his back. The room was filled with sounds of shuffling feet and whispered conversations as the students tried to make sense of what was happening. The driver continued to shout and curse, his voice growing more and more frantic as the reality of the situation set in. "What's going to happen to him?" one of the students asked, breaking the silence. "He's being taken into custody and charged with disorderly conduct and disrupting a learning environment," the guard replied. "The authorities will sort it out from here." The guard tried to lead the driver out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall as the students watched in stunned silence. The professor continued with his lecture, but the mood in the room was tense, and the incident had left a lasting impression on everyone present. Victor sat in his seat, his mind racing with questions and confusion, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. As the security guard was leading the driver out of the hallway, suddenly the driver broke free from his grip and started running down the hall. The guard was caught off guard and quickly gave chase, his heavy footsteps echoing through the building. Victor watched in disbelief as the driver made his escape, dodging and weaving around the corner of the students and the teachers as he made his way towards the exit. The security guard was close behind, shouting for the driver to stop, but the man was determined to get away. The driver reached the main entrance of the building and burst through the doors, sprinting out into the open air. The security guard followed, his breathing heavy as he chased the man across the campus. Despite his best efforts, however, the guard was unable to catch the driver. The man was too fast and agile, slipping through the crowded campus and disappearing into the busy streets. Victor sat in shock, still trying to process what had just happened. He had never witnessed anything like this before, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of confusion and fear about the sudden violence and chaos that had erupted in his class. As the security guard returned, panting and out of breath, Victor couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The driver was still out there somewhere, and it was clear that he was dangerous and unpredictable. Victor made a mental note to be more cautious in the future and to stay alert for any signs of trouble. As Victor made his way back to the parking lot, he suddenly spotted the driver standing by his car. The man was pacing back and forth, a look of rage and frustration etched on his face. Victor's heart raced as he realized he was in danger. He quickly turned to go back inside, but before he could take a step, the driver lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. "You can't get away from me," the driver growled, his eyes wild with anger. Victor struggled against the driver's grip, trying to break free. The man was much stronger than he appeared, and Victor found himself unable to escape. "What did I do?" Victor managed to ask, his voice trembling with fear. "You know what you did," the driver shouted, his face inches away from Victor's. Victor was at a loss. He had no idea what the man was talking about, and he had no idea why he was being targeted. He tried to explain himself, but the driver was too far gone, consumed by his rage and anger. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, and several police officers pulled into the parking lot. Their lights flashing, the driver released Victor and stood up, looking around in confusion. "What's going on?" the driver shouted, his voice filled with fear. The police officers quickly surrounded the driver, guns drawn, and ordered him to surrender. The man hesitated for a moment, and then suddenly raised his hands in the air. As the police officers took the driver into custody, Victor sat on the ground, still in shock from the attack. He couldn't believe that what had just happened, and he felt a sense of relief wash over him as he realized that he was now safe. He slowly got to his feet and made his way home, still trying to make sense of the events of the day. He couldn't help but think about the driver and wonder what had driven the man to such a violent outburst. The experience had shaken him to the core, and he knew that it was something that he would never forget.